The Adventures of Goodnight and Loving by Leslie Thomas. Read by Keith Barron. He had missed yet another day of summer. He had known it all along, of course. The sun segmenting the streets outside the office window, and the bouncing Thames bearing its boats to God knows where. But he realized it again with familiar, almost programmed certainty when the train had cleared London and he saw the man fishing beside the Green River. His heart, his eyes, and his mouth fell simultaneously. At 6:30, the man was unfailingly there, and even when George was required to stay late and it was 8:30 or even 9, there he was with his rod, as if he had spitefully waited. Even when George looked down, he could not resist looking up again. Staring from the train, he would have given quite a lot to see that stranger topple into the weeds and water just as they travelled by, to see his tackle splash, to view his hat floating away. Damn him. George Goodnight was a man of 43 who was half-used, in whom ambition, activity, and even avarice had diminished to vanishing point. Desire had become stilled. A man who had put on the habit of life. It was, he well knew, all too early. At one time, not so long before, he had been truly alive. He had enjoyed books, listened to music, and, on occasions, made love with his wife. In addition, he had met a young woman in Pimlico and enjoyed the secrecy of that. But now it had all become too much trouble. The fat was on him. Everything else had dried or drained. He never went to concerts. He fumbled through both books and love-making. Over only 5 years or so, he had withdrawn, pulled away from the feel of living, hiding himself behind the husk that was a company lawyer. In his working life as the legal advisor to a morning newspaper, he concealed himself behind a facade of pompous references and precedents, which he often quoted to frighten people away. Barnes versus Quilling, he would mutter at some conversational advance. Venny versus Redbolt Properties at another. It was enough to warn most people off. Sometimes he would walk in the Embankment Gardens for a few moments of solitary sunshine. His great solace was his intimate moments with his stamp collection. George would have liked to blame his wife, Felicity, and often he did. She spent too much time at the hairdressers, the Friends of the Cottage Hospital meetings, or the conclaves of conservative women. She had mentioned standing for election to the local council. They were determined activities, programmed to prevent her running to intellectual and emotional fat as he had done. Neither, if asked, could have recalled the last time they ever laughed together. George Goodnight was an everyday, desolate man, bored, routined, unhappy, and lazy. He turned his eyes from the train window and looked again at the first distraction that had entered his life for what seemed like years. It was a sere newspaper cutting a journalist had come across by chance in the News Reference Library. A single-column article from a journal now long defunct. "Last link with the Old West," said the headline, and below it a dozen aged paragraphs about Charles Goodnight, the trailblazer, who had recently died in his 90s. Goodnight, he read again, and his partner Oliver Loving drove 2,000 head of cattle across the waterless New Mexico desert to Fort Sumner, where the United States Army had to feed 7,000 Navajo Indians held as prisoners in stockades. It was one of the greatest adventures in Western history, and the Goodnight and Loving trail is still marked today. There was more. The two partners, starving in the desert, were obliged to boil their cowhide gloves for food, like Charlie Chaplin had boiled his boots. After that, Charles Goodnight devised the chuck wagon, The first mobile kitchen, drawn by a team of oxen, which rattled along cattle trails throughout the west from then on. George's train ran on through the soaked suburban land. Rain streamers, themselves like trails, wriggled across the window beside his face. In the motion of the commuter train, he could almost feel the movement of the range horse between his thighs. He had never been on horseback in his life. He had scarcely been on anything apart from a few trembling childhood rides on a beach donkey at Bognor Regis. His face became set and anxious as he read again about Oliver Loving struck by an Indian arrow while shooting it out from a dried riverbed. They carried him to Fort Sumner, but he died of blood poisoning, and Goodnight transported him across the desert by mule, 700 perilous, hard miles to his home. 700 miles. George's jaw stuck out. 700 miles across the desert. Eyes this way, eyes that, sliding side to side, watch for Indians. When would they reach water? When would this burning sun go down? As he climbed the evening hill from the station, George saw his neighbour walking ahead. Freddy Birch was a rounded, shiny man, and he turned cheerfully as George called. They walked up the long shadows of the suburb together. "I've discovered a sort of ancestor, Fred," George announced. "Take a peep at that. Charles Goodnight, cowboy." His neighbour read it on the move. George sighed. Oh, what a life, eh? He surveyed the roses and rooftops around him. Goodnight and Loving, riding the range. "Don't think much of the idea of eating your own gloves," remarked Freddy wryly. "But think of driving all those cows across the desert." He patted Freddy's substantial shoulder. "How about it, you and me? We'll do a bunk and ride the west. Doesn't that appeal to you?" "Couldn't until Friday," responded his neighbour affably. "Cricket club committee meeting. And then our Lizzie is taking her exams." "And the lawn's half cut," George reminded him. "The lawn's half cut," agreed Freddy. "And of course there's Cynthia. She'd be bound to notice I'd gone." George paused and sighed. They were almost at the brow of the hill. Swollen red, the sun was hanging at the back of a line of regular poplars. Even the sun was behind bars. "Felicity would notice eventually," George nodded. He let himself into his house. It was cool after the walk up the hill. A substantial gin and tonic was made and consumed swiftly. Then he poured another. Holding that, he walked into the study where he kept his stamps. It was shaded in there. A low, rosy light drifted quietly through the pleasing window. With the affection of familiarity, he touched each of the bound albums before taking one from the shelf and rolling open the smooth pages. The simple action never failed to give him a sense of anticipation. At Bermuda he paused, as he always did, smiling to himself, and looked once more at his most treasured possessions, the 3 stamps, appropriately occupying an island on the creamy page, were overwritten in the pen of a long-ago postmaster. Felicity said she could never understand how he could merely look at them. Once you'd seen them, surely you had seen them. But she was pleased they were valuable. He turned the pages slowly. They all seemed fresh to him, adventure trapped in the pages of a book. Men had been known to die for a stamp. He heard Felicity's car on the gravel outside. He closed the album and quickly drank his gin. The next morning, Saturday, they were due to leave for their annual holiday in Cornwall. George woke up feeling predictably gloomy at the prospect, went down to the kitchen and poured himself some coffee from the maker. The morning letters were piled tidily on the kitchen table, a neatness that struck him as slightly odd, but only slightly. Felicity said nothing and went from the room. "What time are we going?" he called once she had gone. He heard her walking upstairs without answering. In 5 minutes that morning, she had not offered a word to him. "We are going to Cornwall, aren't we?" he shouted challengingly out of the door. "Good old, jolly old Cornwall," he muttered to himself as he opened the top letter. Felicity reappeared at once, hurriedly, as if taking her place at the last minute of some performance. He saw her watching him with a sort of eagerness, the expectant expression of one who has a half-share in a prize and wants to learn how much it is. He opened the envelope, and she pulled a chair out and sat opposite, strangely, and at last intimate, her hands together in a roof under her chin. He did not understand. Then he did. He opened the letter and saw it was from a firm of solicitors, Peck, Peach, and Pilbeam of Watford. Even Watford's solicitors had solicitors' names. He read it. She was going to divorce him. A whoosh of anger engulfed him. He ogled across at her, trying to frame some words. Divorce? He suddenly found the word that had been staring him in the face. Die bloody divorce! Whatever are you doing, woman? Applying for a divorce, she replied coolly. As you might put it, Goodnight versus Goodnight. She blatantly tapped the letter. Absolute nonsense, he said dismissively. He stood, but she remained seated, although it looked as if she might be ready to spring. You, he blustered. You can't, not now, not today. We're going to Cornwall. That did it. As though the spark of a fuse had reached her at last, she jumped up in front of him. Her face was abruptly disarranged. We're not going anywhere, she shouted almost up his nose. Anywhere, she repeated. Never again, not together, George Goodnight, because I've had you up to my ears. But a divorce, he said. He looked about him, seeking some non-existent arbitrator. Divorce, she confirmed. Divorce, divorce, divorce. And the sooner the better. We're not going to Cornwall, then. For Christ's sake, I'm not going to Cornwall. Me? I'm not. You can stuff Cornwall, he agreed with her. I don't want to go. Every bloody summer we go to Cornwall. She finished the complaint for him and started for herself. I don't even want to talk about it. You go. I'm not going by myself, he answered, angry again. She was backing towards the door, but she stopped and pushed her head truculently towards him once more. You wouldn't, she said bitterly. Then, you'd be afraid to go by yourself. Afraid him of going to Cornwall? What rubbish! What effrontery! Arrogant bloody woman! How could you be a friend of anyone, even the cottage hospital? He dashed about the empty house like a wasp trying to escape from a room, his anger resurging. He went into every room and swore in every one, as if each had personally insulted him. He swore twice in the bedroom, once at each set of pillows. Then he sat on the bed and made himself calm. Now, he realized, now of all times was the time to go. When he had regained control, still angry but calm, and he had overcome the shock, he saw that she had packed his suitcases for him. Hers was still empty. Cursing to himself, he opened one and added his pinstripe suit in case he landed up anywhere official or was in some place where that sort of British look might attract women. An adventurer simply could not tell. He threw the cases in the back of Felicity's Ford. She had thoughtlessly, or thoughtfully, driven off in the Jaguar when she left for the shops or the hairdressers or wherever she had so determinedly gone. Then, as a final thought, he took his best stamp albums and carried them tentatively, like a priest with an offering, across to Freddy through the trees, his collection of British empires and colonials to 1914. "Freddy," said George. "Freddy?" "Yes, George." I'm going off for a while." "Going off?" George said it. "For an adventure. The wife suggested it, actually. We're going to spend some time apart." He glanced at his neighbour. "Probably the rest of our lives." Freddy was distressed. "Oh, it's like that," he said, but without surprise. "I'm sorry, old chap, I knew things were a bit ribby. You want me to look after the stamps, I take it?" George held out the albums. "Would you mind? They're the only things I really value." Freddy read the letters on the top album. "British Empire, colonies and protectorates to 1914, he recited. "Sounds like mastermind." Freddy left the moor and patted George on the shoulder. "That's not all you care about, old son," he said kindly. He took the albums. "I'll keep an eye on these for you. I'll put them in my safe. And I won't tell anyone. Not even Cynthia." "Especially not Cynthia," pleaded George. "She'll tell Felicity. You know women." "Right," the other man agreed. He smiled. "Your secret is safe with me. I'll be off then." He put out a hand, and Freddy grasped it genuinely. "Have a good adventure, old chap." He paused thoughtfully. "Have one for me as well, will you?" George smiled, but walked away with sadness. He liked Freddy. Freddy watched him go. "See you in a fortnight," the neighbour said quietly to himself. The Fiesta stood red as an apple in the sun. He got in, and with no further glances back, he drove from the gate. God, he thought, if Marco Polo could do it, if Mr. Polly could do it, if Phineas Fogg went round the world in 80 days, if Gauguin ran away to the South Seas, if Captain Ahab pursued the great white whale, if Livingstone, if Hoffman of the Tales and Don Quixote followed their visions, their dreams, their quests, if Oliver Loving and Charles Goodnight dared forth, why not George Goodnight? He was joining the long convoy of men who had risked adventure or simply run away. He arrived at the roundabout where the traffic was queuing to enter the motorway. It was one of the busiest weekends of the year. He chaffed as they crawled timidly with their suitcases piled above and their children bouncing about in the back seats. "Family fools," he growled. Eventually he got to the junction. There it was, a signpost saying simply, "To the west." "To the west," shouted George defiantly, and urged the car forward. Passengers stared at him from the other cars. "To the west!" The puncture occurred in a single lane forced upon the travellers by roadworks lined by red and white cones as shoulder to shoulder as guardsmen. "Oh, bugger it," snorted George. "Damn and bugger it!" He stopped and got out. As he did so, he heard the anguish rise behind him. Howling heads poked from cars. Children began to cry, and wives chide. "That's lovely, that is," bellowed a face thrust from an old Cortina immediately to the rear. "That's bleeding lovely." Taking a heavy hold on himself, George glanced at the tyre pressed down into a toothless grin, and then made his way back to the following vehicle. The road before him was now as clear as a country lane. Behind, the traffic seethed as far back as he could see. "I appear to have a puncture," he said calmly to the driver of the Cortino, an aghast man in a flowered shirt bearing the legend Honolulu. "Lovely," said the man again, but lower, appearing to ponder his lines. "Bloody lovely, that is." George glanced round at the scenery, as if he were missing some beauty he should appreciate. He became aware that other angry men and several women of bitchy demeanour were approaching in 2 Indian files along both sides of the cars. Shouts and gesticulations came from them as they rocked alongside an excavation in the closed section of the road. "Listen! Listen!" Everybody stopped and listened. A big leader-like man bundled his way along the line of protesters. "Listen, why doesn't everybody stop squabbling and let's get his wretched car off the road?" George tried to comment, but his words were lost in a universal approval of the suggestion. Men moved forward, and in a moment a posse was pushing the injured vehicle down the single available lane of the motorway, with the authoritative man summarily inside at the wheel. At the point where the long trench ceased and the cones corralled firm tarmac, the big man turned the wheel and others pushed the barrier aside. Sounding a relieved cheer, the drivers, wiping their hands, went back to their vehicles, leaving George standing hopelessly by his car, marooned among the silent Saturday steamrollers and piles of gravel. He turned and began to walk along the middle between the roadworks. The cars streamed by. No one stopped and offered him a lift. Like pioneers, their eyes were fixed on the west. On the other side of the roadworks, cars were going by in the opposite direction, away from holidays back to reality. He thought perhaps he ought to ask for a lift that way. It was the oasis towers of the motorway service area on the skyline ahead that deterred him. He tramped across the sand, gravel and cement as if he were navigating a desert. He felt hot and dispirited, but eventually he trudged up the incline towards the shops, the restaurant and the toilet facilities of the service area. The fuel pump section was beyond. In the central kiosk, sitting behind glass like the pilot of a plane, was a youth with orange hair. "Is there a manager?" asked George. "Benny," smirked the youth behind the glass. "There, Immoblin. A Suzuki went over his toes." George turned and walked towards the bent Benny. He was helpful despite his injury. The breakdown truck had lived up to its name and was broken down, but he knew a man in a neighbouring village who might be persuaded to come out, but at some cost. He picked up the telephone and dialed. There was no reply. "I'd come and help you myself," he said decently, "but I can't leave here, not weekends, and there's my toes. I can't put pressure on, see." He demonstrated, leaning onto his left foot and emitting a little yelp of pain. He suggested that George should go to the restaurant, have a cup of tea, and return later. George thanked him and walked across the hot tarmac. He went into the restaurant and sat down unhappily. It was 1 o'clock. His shirt was damp. A waitress, a clean, rosy girl, arrived at his elbow almost soundlessly. He ordered a ham salad. Benny stumbled in as he was eating and said flatly, "I got him and he went up to where you said you'd left your car. It's gone." "Gone?" George let a segment of tomato drop onto his shirt. "How do you mean, gone?" "Not there," explained the manager, unruffled. "There must have been some mistake." "I left it there," George said, rising. The waitress was coming towards him anxiously. I'll be back later," he said to her. "Right you are," said the girl, picking up the salad plate. "I'll keep this clean." At the door, Benny offered to drive him along the motorway so that he could see for himself. Gratefully, George accepted, and they got into the manager's blue car and limped out onto the motorway. Opposite the spot where he had left the car, Benny pulled over to the hard shoulder, and George stood outside and looked up and down the sunlit road. It was gone, all right. He got back into the car again. "Call the police," suggested Benny. "They might know." They returned once again to the service area, and Benny used the telephone. George turned and stared out of the window at the white afternoon, the bright sky, the streaming hot sunshine, the cars belting by, the pumps and the tarmac. The fumes filtered through the glass. He had only been an adventurer for one morning. He had journeyed less than 50 miles, and already he was marooned on a concrete island and had lost everything. He felt perhaps he ought to go home. There was a basic motel like a large coal bunker at the rear of the service area, and, at the thoughtful Benny's suggestion, he took a room there. Life on the concrete island was, at least, almost self-sufficient, and he was able to buy a toothbrush and razor at the shop together with the Times, the Mid-Wiltshire Chronicle, and a bottle of lemonade. After a long, dreamless night's sleep, he went to the restaurant for breakfast. On the way, he telephoned the police, who seemed to have some difficulty in recalling his case. No, there had been no developments. All sorts of strange things happened on the motorway. Please ring later. The straw-haired waitress was working, and they smiled at each other. "Still awaiting," she said, showing him to a corner table. "No news yet." "Not a thing," he confirmed. He ordered his breakfast. He felt much better today. She poured his coffee. She was a big girl, not fat, but full, with a fine, large bust under her apron. It hung close to his nose while she bent over with a coffee jug. He asked her name, and she told him it was Molly. After he'd eaten the breakfast, she returned, and, since there were a few customers now, they discussed what he should do next. Cars, Molly shrugged. Can't abide them. More trouble than they're worth. How do you get to work? He asked. You must come on the motorway. Not me, she said. I comes on across the fields. There's a hole in the hedge. When he had finished, she said it was time for her break. I'll show you if you like, she offered. She led him behind the service area to a vacant piece of tangled ground. In front of them was a high hedge of hawthorn and hazel blocking the view as effectively as a wall. She went ahead, her big body swaying gracefully in her frilled apron. She turned by a tree and pulled aside a rough door of wood and corrugated iron. "'Tain't very posh," she laughed. She stepped through first, and George followed immediately. He stumbled, stood, and then saw. Astonished, he looked out on a dappled countryside of green and yellow meadows, hills tumbling from below his very feet and rising smoothly into the middle distance. Molly turned and smiled her cornfield smile at him. She held her large hand back invitingly. "'Tis called Summerborn Magna," she said. Down in the valley, a man moved from the houses and dipped a bucket into a pond formed by a brief weir in a rippling stream. Molly stopped, grass and flowers forming a hem around her skirt, and holding George's arm aloft like a boxing referee proclaiming a winner, she called down to the man, "Bert, I got'n." The man put his hand to his eyes and peered up, setting the full bucket cautiously on the ground. The girl called again, "Here he be." Bert waved uncertainly, picking up the bucket, and went round a stone corner. Molly propelled her smile to George once more. Her neck, flowing down to her pinafored breasts, was glistening. "That's good," she breathed deeply. "Bert likes you." Less certainly, George allowed himself to be led into the lower slopes of the vale. "Bert is who?" he inquired. "Bert," she answered. "He's my dad. He keeps the Red Cow." The air was heavy, tranquil, and deeply smelling of dung. A loaded cart had progressed down the single street, dropping small gobs and occasional complete cowpats every few yards, as if fertilizing the small thoroughfare itself. Molly turned into a dark door, above which was a sign depicting a rust-coloured cow, and they entered a passage hung with the smell of old beer, went through a frosted glass door and into the bar, a place of plastic and pink with a fruit machine and a jukebox standing shoulder to chrome shoulder. On the bar was a tall mound of silver coins, an ant-hill construction of 10-pence pieces. "For charity," pointed Molly proudly. She rolled her country eyes to him. "We've got a room as it happens," she said. "We could lodge you." She took a coin from the charity pile and pressed it into the jukebox. An arm swung within, and a disc was placed in a slot. "Frankie goes to Hollywood," announced Molly, turning her lovely eyes on him. "Does he?" mumbled George. "Perhaps I could take your room for a few days." Molly turned towards him. "I reckon you'll like it here," she forecast. He allowed her to lead him upstairs, a place of beams and passages, so confined he had to crouch, into a beautiful beamed bedroom. A fine-paned window filled with sunshine, which fell in patterns across the girth of the counterpane, covering a powerful four-poster bed. "Don't bang your head when you sit up, because you'll be hearing the ghosts," laughed Molly. She moved to the window as if to check that the view was still available, before turning, her dress spinning. "What do you reckon, then?" she asked. "I reckon I'll like it here," echoed George. He slept well that night in the copious bed below the beams, and only woke when there was sunlight outside the window and the garden was bright with the sound of birds. Someone was tugging at his sleeve, and he opened his eyes to see Molly holding a large flowered cup of tea. She had obtained a long pair of striped pyjamas, which she had worn to bed. "You look nice in them pyjamas," she said. He pushed his leg from the bedclothes. That made her laugh, and she put down the cup and boisterously hoisted the limb back into the bed. "Where did you borrow them?" he asked. "I'm not telling," she said primly. She smoothed down her fresh dress. Suddenly her eyes were bright. "I'm off to work," she murmured. "What am I going to do without you?" asked George. "You'll have to get along as best you can," she answered. He saw that she was blushing a deep rhubarb colour. "You could have a bath," she suggested in a slow voice. "Water's nice and hot now." She turned away. "I'll be getting you some towels." Noisily, she went out. Calling back from the corridor, she said, "Lance's pyjamas look fabulous on you." He sat in the great bed, feeling like a nabob. After he had bathed, shaved and dressed, he went down to the morning pallor of the dining room. Bert appeared, leaning at an acute forward angle and carrying a tray like a juggler. "Moll said you was to have brown eggs," he said. "2, is that all right? And she cut the bread and butter herself. She don't trust me." Doubtfully, he handed George the Sun. "There's no news about your car." He glanced at George with a fragment of concern. "What will you do?" George decapitated both eggs, which were sitting up expectantly in a double-egg cup. 4 minutes, said Bert, bending closer to peer in at the contents. "Most particular about that, she was." "I'll just stay for a couple of days, if that's all right," said George. "There's no hurry, is there?" "Not for us," shrugged Bert. "Don't make no difference." He became thoughtful, then decided to say, "Lance is back tonight, that's all." "Lance? Oh, I think I've been wearing his pyjamas." "More'n likely he's Molly's, boyfriend." Bert became embarrassed. "Well, not exactly boyfriend." He giggled, and his broken teeth appeared like peanuts. "He certainly ain't no boy, but you know, he's a funny bugger, and he might just take jealous." His expression crinkled, as if he had said too much. "Molly paying a lot of attention to you, see?" Lance Onions appeared in the Red Cow that night. He was tall and thin, with a narrow face and pale, rural eyes. His black hair was thick over the back and sides of his head, with a semicircle of freckled baldness at the front, so symmetrical it might have been especially fashioned. He stood, large feet planted belligerently in the middle of the floor, next to the bar. Beer from his awry tankard was slopping over its edge. "Me?" he roared. "I've been everywhere, I have, Lester Brummingham." He appeared lost for a moment. Then an explosion of inspiration made him tremble. "Wick!" He glared around. Bert and Molly, looking frightened, were behind the bar. "Yes," bawled Lance, turning on Bert. "Wick, I've been." He saw that he was jettisoning beer and hurriedly lifted the tankard to his lips, sucking an inch from the surface. Trying to appear unperturbed, George moved forward through the crowd and said pleasantly, "Evening, Lance. Evening, everyone." He was sure Lance was about to attack him. The high and heavy man crouched. Hatred deepened the flush on his face. "You!" he shouted. His voice descended. "You! I've heard about you." "Coming here to Summerborn, spoiling people's lives?" His glare became maniacal. "I've travelled, I have, mister. I've seen the likes of you. I've travelled." "Yes, I know," said George, foolishly taunting. "To Wick." "Arr!" The roar filled the bar and sent the villagers staggering back. White-faced, Lance put his trembling pint down first and then pushed at George with both hands, sending him staggering backwards into the crowd about the fireplace, spilling drinks and customers. As George attempted to right himself, he fell in comic supplication forward onto his knees. "Lance Onions!" shouted Molly. "You get out of this pub!" "You!" bellowed Lance across the bar. "You!" Molly's face went pale, but she stood her ground. Picking up Lance's own beer, she flung it over his head. That made him cry. He wiped his face with his hands like a huge child, and then with a howl of vengeance and anguish demolished at one blow of his fist the tower of silver coins that the Red Cow had collected so long and so patiently for charity. 10-penny pieces flew like shrapnel, clinking and jingling all over the room, rolling among the tables and chairs. Several people were quickly on their haunches, almost as quickly as Lance delivered a second blow at the base of the column still remaining. Then, howling and sobbing through beer and tear-soaked eyes, he made for the door and banged out into the street. A stark moment later, his crazed face appeared at the street window. "Lance Onions has had this place," he bawled through the glass. The figure vanished. Everyone looked at the coins. "We'd better start picking 'em up," muttered Bert. The moon, sifting through the dormer, drifted across his room. It illuminated the gnarled door, which made a sound like a low cough as it opened. George, who was falling to sleep, opened one eye, followed by the other. Molly was standing like a large and beautiful ghost in the moonbeams. She was wearing a long, pale muslin nightdress that fell into a great open gulch below her neck, the skin of her bosom shining softly. "I expect you'll be going on soon, Mr. Goodnight," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied from the bed. He had difficulty in saying even the simple word, but he rallied. "I think I must, Molly." She stepped one pace into the room and pushed the door closed behind her. "I'd better say goodbye properly then," she muttered. As it was Tuesday, there was a bus going to Warminster. Molly did not wish him goodbye. She had gone to work while he slept. Bert was silent and anxious at breakfast, as if he had heard news of a crisis in some remote place. He agreed, however, that George could leave his suit hanging in the wardrobe until such time as he could return and claim it. George took a seat in the rear of the bus on the long back seat of hard, shiny plastic, torn into wide rifts. A man at the far end of the seat, round-faced, small-eyed, and wearing a stained cap and a robust suit, half-turned and said, still chewing, "You're going on, then?" Unsurprised now by the immediacy of rural inquiry, George agreed that he was going on. "Good thing you are," pursued the man tonelessly. "That Lance Onions ain't one to be mucked with." "I've never mucked with him," retorted George, but mildly, "I had planned to move on anyway. I have to go places." "Warminster?" inquired the other man. "Paris," retorted George, blatantly on a sudden impulse. "I'm on my way to France." The streets of Cherbourg, near the quays and jetties, grew close against each other, as if they were jostling to get a slight view of the sea. George took a random corner and found himself looking into low windows of food and hardware, sea-going clothes and shoes, a tobacconist, a place selling hued ice creams, and soberly, amid the others, a stamp dealer's. It was a cleft of a shop, a single window and a door. At once George felt a reassurance. He looked in the window for a few minutes, approving the wares, mostly French colonials, Indochino, Cameroons, and Nouvelle Caledonian. One goodish set of Trinidad and Tobago, 1913, the first year Tobago appeared on the stamps. He went confidently into the shop. "Hello, Brent and Rainey." "Oh, hello. Could I speak to Mr. Birch, please?" "Yes, one moment." "It's an international call from overseas." "Yes, I see. Putting you through." "Hello, Birch here." "Fred, it's George." "Good God, George, you again. Where are you now?" "France, old boy. Cherbourg." "Wonderful. So things are happening." "They certainly are. Listen, Fred, I can't talk for long because I'm using Monsieur Julian's phone." "Oh, Monsieur Julian, I see. He's a stamp dealer. Fred, you've still got the stamps safe?" "As houses." "There's a set of used Queen Victorias, British Honduras, 10, including a green and black $5. "Right, I'm writing it down. Green and black $5. Got you. Take the whole set off the page. Be careful, won't you, Fred? Send them to me here, care of Monsieur Julian, 24 Avenue Racine, Cherbourg, Manche, Normandy, France. Express them or whatever, will you, Fred? And put some protection around them." "All right, George, I've got all that. Are you going to flog them?" "Something's got to finance all this excitement, Fred." Seen anything of Felicity?" "She went off for a couple of days somewhere. She never said where." "Oh, did she? By herself?" "Don't know. Never mind. You have a good time." "I will," George promised flatly. "Send the stamps as soon as you can." Slowly, he replaced the phone. "Oui, monsieur," said Monsieur Julian. "It is arranged?" "The stamps, yes, all fixed. They should be here in a few days." Bon. What will you do now?" "Find somewhere to stay, I suppose," said George. Monsieur Julian nodded with slow but certain understanding. "Exactement, you must have somewhere. There is a small but good auberge at the end of the street. Monsieur and Madame Muller Wolfgang and Marie. They will make you comfortable until the stamps arrive and we can do business. Tonight I will be there also at the Villa Bismarck. Twice a week I dine there, for I am alone." They ate salt mutton, a speciality of the area, said Monsieur Julian, the sheep having grazed on the seashore meadows. Enjoying the old man's company, George ordered a calvados. Monsieur Julian had a glass of claret. "Near this place," the Frenchman said, as if he had been awaiting the proper moment to tell, "there is an excellent stamp collection, highly excellent. Not so much a collection, you might say, more a mass. Stamps and stamps and stamps. Oh, but in such a state, monsieur, that it would make you weep." He drank his wine and shook the glass and his head at the same time. "They belonged once to a man I knew, who is very famous in this town, Monsieur Joby, Robert Joby, the late. His daughter Janine is in the house with all these stamps, and she does not know what to do with them. I could go tomorrow and buy them, for I know she would take what I offered without question. But I have told her that they must be catalogued and valued before they are sold. I would try it myself, but I'm too old, too slow, and I make mistakes. They would fetch a big sum of money at auction. Tomorrow I'm going to visit Mademoiselle Joby," continued the Frenchman. "If you would be pleased, I will telephone and ask if it is possible for you to be with me. I'm sure she would agree. It is a fine house, against the sea." The Villa Lamar stood solitary above the coast, its chimneys frequented by wind, gulls poised on its dark roof, its seaward face chafed by years of maritime weather. The southerly aspect was sheltered, and there an enclosed courtyard and garden with green creepers and climbers softened its walls. It was early evening when they drove there in Monsieur Julian's pottering Peugeot. Janine Joby came to the door to greet them. Her English was next to perfect. She was slim and neat, her face and hair careful. Her hands moved as she spoke. She had green eyes and, George thought, was about 40 years of age. "My mother was English," she said. They went into the house and walked to a room overlooking the sea, blue now, but uneasy from the day's weather. She had poured some wine for them. "You would like to see some of the stamps?" suggested Janine. "Please," answered George, "if it's not too inconvenient." "Not at all. It is amazing, the interest." She stood. "I think the annex." She glanced towards Monsieur Julian and led the way through the rooms and corridors. They entered a long stone room, almost like a vaulted tunnel, daylight coming through deeply incised windows. The room was stacked with sombre furniture, massive tables supporting thick-legged chairs, cabinets and bookcases heavy against the walls. She moved to one of the 2 filing cabinets and slid open a drawer. "As I say, they are not in good order. My father preferred them to be like that. They are valuable, I understand, but they are to me only small pieces of coloured paper." She had taken a ragged and bulky album from the drawer. George relieved her of its weight. She turned and pressed a button switch upon the wall. From the ceiling a spotlight beamed, making a pool of illumination. George placed the album on a table, crowded against the cabinet, and opened the heavy cover. It was like turning a hinged box. He blinked at the disorder of the page. He bent close and studied them. Austro-Hungarian Empire, faded blues, yellows, and a fine rose, with the heads of emperors and their consorts long gone. George turned the page and was astonished to see a fine set of Falkland Islands, Edward VII. They were scattered on the page also, with an incongruously ordered rank of mundane Belgian Congo across the foot. "Splendid," murmured George. "Really excellent, mademoiselle." Monsieur Julian said, "He is an expert of British possessions, you understand." "I see," acknowledged Janine vaguely. "A collector," muttered George, gazing at a Tasmania Queen Victoria, which he had never before set eyes upon. "Not really an expert, but these are marvellous." "I will get some tea," said Janine, politely but decisively. "Please carry on for a few minutes." She turned quickly and threaded her way between the pile furniture. As they were drinking the tea, she invited them to lunch on the following day. "You can then see something else of the old stamps." Monsieur Julian excused himself. He had to go to Saint Malo. Janine looked hopefully at George. "Perhaps, Mr. Goodnight, you could come. Are you here for some time?" "Yes," said George, "for a few days at least. I will be delighted." He found himself looking into her pale face and green eyes. "I have never in my life seen a collection like that," he said. For the next months, through the best days of the ending summer and the length of autumn, George remained at Lamar. Never in his life, not in childhood or youth, or in the first good times of his marriage, had he ever been so constantly aware of such happiness. There were days of bright and blue, sunshine spreading itself extravagantly over the coast and shifting the tones of the sea. The good weather was punctuated by grandiose storms, watched from the vantage of the rampart house on the cliff. Each day George worked at a table set by the turret window, where he had first looked out at the sudden drop to the sea. In the fine weather the sun would probe into the vault-like room, and he managed to persuade one of the old iron windows to open so that the airy scent of the channel came through also. When the swaggering storms or fog or maritime rain occurred, he would sit, arms folded, at his table and view the weather with the enjoyment of one safe indoors. At the start of his task, he spent a week merely sifting through the astonishing collection of random stamps marking the location of British issues. Then he began to match, annotate and value, taking the stamps with tweezers from the haphazard pages and collating them in a new album. After only a few hours he was certain, as he had always known, that the collection was exceptional and of great value. He was also in love with Janine Joby, and she with him. Conscientiously he worked fixed hours, but at meal times and late in the afternoons he would finish and find her in the house or garden. They spent fine evenings walking along the sea fringe, over the shingle and sand, when most people had gone for the day and the sky was diminishing to the west. Sometimes it was nearly dark when they returned, with the final gulls sounding and lights flashing at sea. The lights of La Manche would be yellow at the top of the cliff, and dinner prepared. On a few Fridays they went to a jovial fish restaurant in the town, and sometimes George would walk in the middle of the day to a bar on the harbour, where he would drink with Monsieur Julian and Herr Muller from the Villa Bismarck. One evening, towards the end of his time there, after dinner, they were sitting together, and Janine said, suddenly, as if she had abruptly made up her mind, "When I was 17, you know, I had a child." He was drinking cognac. "And what happened?" he asked eventually. She smiled at him. "You hide your astonishment very well," she said. "Behind my glass," he told her. "It was a baby girl," she said. "I do not know where she is now. I have never known." "You don't? That's very sad for you," he said, touching her. "Your father arranged things, I suppose?" She sighed. "Yes, he arranged things. The father of the child does not matter now. God, I can hardly remember him. But I wanted the baby. Very much I wanted her. But I was only 17, and I was not strong enough to resist. She was taken away, and I don't know where. She will be 23 now, wherever she is. Sometimes I imagine I have seen her in the street in Paris, but I know it is only fancy." George said, "Doesn't your family lawyer know? Surely he would have some notion of—" Monsieur Benoit was not then the family lawyer. The man who was the attorney then denied he was consulted in the matter. He said that the business was dealt with by some other man. Now he is dead in any case. She looked at him strangely. "They came and took the baby and promised I would see her the next day. But they were lying. I never did. My father was a very brutal man at times." "I don't know how you could ever have forgiven him," said George. "Indeed I did not. I remained here, but I never forgave." In the darkness of their room that night, she said to him, when he was almost asleep, "How long do you think your work on the stamps will take?" He roused and turned to her in the bed. Wind was heavily blowing against the windows. "Another week or so, I imagine. Say 10 days. And then will they all be correct?" "The British colonials, yes. It should not be any longer than that." "Darling," she said after a pause, "will you take them to Paris for me? Take them to Monsieur Benoit. Of course. Won't you come too? No, it is not possible. I have to go to the United States at the end of this month. Before that, I must go to London. I will go straight from here. It is just business. That is my responsibility. He felt her smiling as he kissed her in the dark. To go to Paris will occupy you when I am away, she whispered. Yes, he returned. Of course I will. I'll take them. Even as he said it, he knew that they would not now be very long together. From the moment he passed through the door of Monsieur Benoit's office, George was aware that there were many things he did not know. The lawyer, sitting leanly behind his desk, rose and greeted him quietly. He took the case containing the 3 albums and offered George a chair. "Janine wrote to me," he said immediately. "This I received yesterday." He picked up a letter on delicate notepaper. "She has requested that you take the stamps you have collated to a person in Hong Kong." "Hong Kong? Why? There are dealers here in Paris." "Don't worry, she's not merely providing you with employment, a chance to go further on your adventures. So do not be concerned about that. Her father always wished the British possession stamps to go to an English friend, Sir Bernard Holmes, who now lives in Hong Kong. He always wanted to purchase them. I know this is true because I have the request in his own writing. I must provide you with funds for the journey and accommodation, also a fee for the assignment, and there is payment for your expert and patient work at Lamar." George said sadly, "I'm being paid off. Somehow I didn't think it would be like this. It's all very sudden." "Janine has insisted upon this. So do the Joby family. I agree with them. There's no more to discuss. The English gentleman, Sir Bernard Holmes, will be expecting you. His address is in the envelope. Also a covering letter." George rose to go. "Somehow," he said, "something is wrong. I feel it is wrong." "The Joby family have gratitude to you, monsieur," responded the lawyer. "That is all I can say." They reached the door. Suddenly George said, "Janine told me she once had a baby when she was only 17. It was taken away on her father's instructions." "Yes, that is the case as I understand it. We have been unable to trace that child. We have even had a private investigator searching, but with no success." He looked thoughtfully at George. "Perhaps, monsieur, that would be another task for you. Maybe you could find this girl." The suggestion startled George. "How? I would not know where to begin." Then he said, "But of course I would try." He added, "He must have been a terrible man." "Joby, yes, he was. He disposed of the baby during the 1963 International Philatelic Congress in Paris. Possibly the secret arrangement was with one of the other delegates." George said, "Do you think so?" "I do," said the lawyer. "It would seem the sort of thing that would have happened. How would you say it? Swapped, is it? Yes, perhaps. The baby was swapped for a set of stamps." Deeply unhappy, George walked through the dull Paris day back to the Hotel des Deux Lacs. The feeling that there was something amiss, something he had not been told, remained heavily upon him. How could she send him away like this, so dismissively, so abruptly? As he entered the hotel, the reception clerk held out an envelope to him. "Special delivery, monsieur," he said. "It arrived 1 hour ago." George recognized her handwriting. With an apprehensive heart, he took it to his room and sat on the bed, staring at the envelope, afraid to open it. Was she merely explaining that it was necessary to pay him off, that for some reason, her family perhaps, or something within herself, she wished him to leave? Falteringly, he opened the letter. It was only 1 paragraph. "Chérie, you are wondering why I have sent you away. I must tell you, I am ill from leukemia, and it is necessary for me to leave La Manche and take some treatment, as I have done in the past. My time with you was the happiest of all my life." It was signed, "With all my love and my thanks." Although he could not see it through his tears, they fell in great drops onto the notepaper, and, unthinkingly, he wiped them off, leaving smudges in the ink. He put the letter on the bed and cried into his hands. His throat was full, his heart bursting. He picked up the telephone and dialed the code for Cherbourg and the house number. He could hear the phone ringing emptily. There was no reply. Sir Bernard Holmes lived in a substantial faded mansion on the hills above Hong Kong. He was a rounded man with two startled tufts of grey hair sprouting from behind his ears, between which curved a ruddy bald head. It was like the sun going down in clouds. He took the album from George and studied them with unconcealed pleasure. "Delightful, quite delightful," he murmured, turning the pages. He looked up. George was sitting in a leather armchair with a gin and tonic held in both hands. He had a growing sensation of homesickness. "You must have had an enjoyable time collating this little treasure trove."
"It was a labour of love," said George sincerely. "Sir Bernard," he said, while the elder man was still letting the pages drift through his fingers, "I wonder if I might ask you a private question, I suppose." It seemed that the grey tufts behind the old man's ears stood up a little, like thistles opening. "Yes, of course, old chap, as long as it's private, not secret." "No, private." "Good, fire away." He closed the album and laid it carefully on top of the others on the lamplit desk. "Sounds intriguing." "Were you of the International Philatelic Congress in Paris in 1963? "Most certainly. I haven't missed one since the war." "You saw Monsieur Robert Joby there, I take it?" "Of course. Doubt if he missed one either. His collection may have been unorthodox, as you well know, but he's a great stamp man." There seemed to be no diplomatic way of posing the next question. "Do you have any knowledge of him giving away a baby at the Congress?" asked George. Blatant disbelief filled Sir Bernard's eyes. "A baby?" he asked, astounded. "Give away a baby?" He exploded with genuine laughter and picked up his whiskey. "My dear fellow, what an extraordinary question." George nodded unhappily. "Yes, it certainly is," he agreed. "Unfortunately, it appears that he may have done. I thought you might remember having heard something of this matter." "Not a thing." He laughed shortly. "He didn't give her to me, that's certain. I've got enough daughters of my own. I wish I could help, but this is the first I've heard of it." George thanked him. "I imagine that there was a great secrecy about it," he said. "Only the immediate parties would know." He hesitated. "Would you, by any chance, have any records of that Congress, lists of delegates or that sort of thing?" The elderly man brightened at once. "There I can help you," he explained. "We don't even have to leave this room." He rose and turned to a cabinet at the far end, adjacent to the window. "List of leading delegates," he said. "Prospective foster fathers. You can keep it with pleasure." George thanked him and put the list into the inside pocket of his jacket. He declined another drink and left. He trudged back down into the hot, hilly city, tired with his journey. Not merely the miles he had flown, but with all of it, the entire damned Odyssey. He was flagging. The spectacular spread of the harbour, the packing-case buildings, the iron background of mountains, the people and the traffic passing about and below him as he walked down the steep slope were all wasted on a jaded eye. He did not know where he was going. Back in his over-expensive hotel room, George walked to the window and opened the light curtains. Outside the window, the sun remained bright. He stood feeling it coming through the glass, staring out over the long view. Transferring his look downwards, he observed far below that the hotel had a swimming pool. He decided to have a swim. Afterwards, he would order a pot of tea and chicken sandwiches and come to a firm decision about the rest of his life. It was a small pool fitted onto the roof of the third floor of the hotel, which jutted out from the rest of the building. Dust and din rose from the traffic. Outside the glass door, the sun struck him forcefully. There was only one other person there, a young woman of truly athletic beauty, tall-limbed, slender-armed, wearing a one-piece black swimsuit that dropped like an axe cut between her exemplary breasts. Her neck was firm, her face splendid, her hair fair. Every inch of her body, as far as you could see, was conscientiously tanned.
When she spoke, it was with an Australian accent. "Hello," she smiled, shiningly. "I'm Charmaine Mangles." "I'm Oliver Loving," he replied, blindly. Ron Mangles, her husband, excessive in a green shirt and plaid trousers, appeared noisily through the swing door while they were conversing. Behind him, he dragged a leg like a dead albatross. He invited George to join them for a drink, but quite absently, as if he had something ponderous on his mind. They were up from Sydney on business. No sooner had the drinks waiter come to the pool than there came a loudspeaker call for Mr. Ron Mangles to go to the telephone. "Shit," the man grunted, looking around suspiciously at the adjacent windows and roof. "They could hear that in the street." Charmaine ordered the drinks, and she and George sat at a table under the oriental sun and drank pink gins. She was only 24, she confided, and this was her first time outside Australia. It was in the nature of a part business, part honeymoon trip, because she and Ron, who was 25 years older, had only been married 2 months. She had met him on the Queensland Gold Coast, where she'd been on vacation, and had married him because she felt sorry for him, being as lonely as he was, and so rich. "You have a wonderful name, Mr. Loving," she murmured. "Oliver Loving. It's so beaut." George was already regretting the lie, for which he blamed the black swimsuit with its awesome plunge, but he would only need to sustain the charade for a while. He was a damn nuisance, Oliver Loving, an unsporting bastard, jumping up like that, pushing to introduce himself at the first inkling of a pair of exceptional breasts. She stood up, an Art Deco figure, and plunged exotically into the pool. Thighs and calves abutting, toes thrust back, backside a black satin as bent as a boomerang. Watching her, waiting for her head, wet shoulders and slippery bosom to resurface, George spilt his gin. He walked unconfidently to the poolside and levered himself into the shallow end. He was not much of a swimmer. Charmaine had already touched the far end and was ploughing back towards him like a corvette. She pulled up, face streaming, beaming brown shoulders, and the naked half of the breast clear of the surface. She looked at him speculatively, but pulled her eyes away when her husband came through the glass door and onto the sun deck. "Ron," she called, "everything all right?" "Come out and let's go and eat," he called back, dragging his encumbering leg along the poolside. George continued to dog paddle. "Must go. Goodbye," said Charmaine. She pushed out a slim hand, and they shook hands below the surface of the water. Her eyes were full of concern. "Nice meeting you, Mr. Loving," she whispered. George remained in the pool for another few minutes, practicing his dog paddle after she had climbed out. At least Oliver Loving could now be put safely away, back where he belonged, in storage. George climbed out, dried himself, picked up his key from the table, and went up in the lift to his room. The fatigue of the plane journey now dropped over him. He lay on the bed in the hotel dressing gown and went at once into sleep. When he awoke, it was night outside the window, with the lights of Hong Kong splashing on the clouds. His telephone was ringing. He picked it up. It was Charmaine. "Mr. Loving," she said tremulously, "I took the liberty of noting your key number. Could you please come to suite number 17, 4th floor? Ron is not at all well. In fact, he's dead." George sat quickly upright. "Dead? Good God, are you sure?" "Positive," she trembled. "I've tried pinching him." "I'll come right away." "Oh, thank you so much. I didn't know who else to call." He rolled from the bed and splashed water on his face from the bathroom basin. He put on his shirt, trousers and shoes and hurried to the lift. At suite 17, he knocked, and the serious face of Charmaine appeared as it was opened. Her tan had paled. "Mr. Loving, thank God," she whispered. "I've never been alone with a corpse before." George went into the sitting room and then followed her to the bedroom. The suite was luxurious, its silks, brocades and veneers emphasizing the commonplace form of the dead man lying in striped pyjamas on the bed. One of the pyjama legs hung empty as an airfield windsock. Ron's artificial leg, knee to foot, was standing in a corner. "Did you call a doctor?" asked George, studying the cadaver sideways. "It looked too late for a doctor," she answered, her hands flying about like butterflies. "I didn't know what to do. You're the only person I know here." She was wearing an oyster satin robe, her hair pulled away from her face so that a rim of whiter skin was revealed. She looked more powerfully seductive than ever. Suddenly, she flung herself at him, the unexpected force almost knocking him down. "What a terrible thing to happen to me," she wailed, her arms clutching him to her body. "It isn't all that good for Ron either," George tried to point out. The feel of her overwhelmed him. His hands had somehow found her silken waist. Guiltily, he retrieved them. "I think we had better call somebody." George picked up the telephone and asked for the manager. The assured and quiet Chinese voice which replied faltered when he explained the circumstances. "Would you like a drink, Charmaine?" asked George as he put the phone down. "They're sending someone up." "Yes, please," she said quite cheerfully. "Scotch for me." He poured 2 scotches and added some water. Lifting his glass, George said, "I ought to tell you something." "What's that?" "My name isn't Oliver Loving. It's just a name I use sometimes. My real name is George Goodnight." "I know that," she answered affably. Each had the whiskey just below the nose. The eyes remained meeting. "Ron had you checked out just before he went like that. He always had people checked out. Come to think of it, it was just about the last thing he ever did." "Checked me out? Why was that?" "He was in business. He had to be careful. The minute you appeared at the swimming pool, he had you on his suspicious list." "He must have been in a touchy sort of business." "Oh, he was. Import and export." He said nothing. She finished the scotch and held out the glass for a refill. "Most of it's unofficial," she added quietly. "Very unofficial. That's what I'm afraid of. You won't leave me, will you?" "No, of course not. I don't mean just tonight, George. All the way to Sydney. You're the only best round here I can trust, in case anyone gets up to some funny business." "Oh, well, look. You're not busy, are you?" "Not at the moment. I need a man to look after my interests and deal with anything. I'll pay you, of course. Please." Well, there was a knock at the door. It was an unusually tall Chinese in a light grey suit. "Allow me to introduce," he said with an elongated bow. "I am Gregory Chan, the business partner of Mr. Ron Mangles." "Come in," said George. "I take it you know he's dead." "I have a message," said Chan with a brief nod. "There is no need for worry," he said precisely, the tips of his tall fingers touching. "We are not to get out of our prams, as the saying is. Everything will be done." "Everything?" My associates will arrange all. The body must be returned to Australia. Does the family of Mr. R. Mangles know about the sad news?" "No," whispered Charmaine. She was nervous of him. "It's all happened this evening. We will take care of that." "Who," asked George, a trifle firmly, "is we?" Chan produced a large business card written in English and Chinese. It said, "Chan and Chan, Imports and Exports." One of his long fingers came like a snake's head over the corner of the card. "If there is anything you wish to know, this is the number. We are all well known in Hong Kong and throughout the East." George glanced at Charmaine, who nodded in a frightened way. Her eyes seemed to have backed into her head. "Well," said George, "as long as there are references, I am a stranger here myself." "We know," said Mr. Chan. His eyes flicked up briefly. "That is why you must not have responsibility?" "I want Mr. Goodnight to help." Charmaine's voice vibrated. "I am a lawyer," put in George so quickly he surprised himself. "We know," reiterated Chan. He bowed. "If Mrs. Mangles wishes you to look after her interests, then of course that is fine with us." He looked towards the bedroom. "We will look after Mr. Mangles." Chan regarded them loftily, his fingers like a roof under his chin. "Have a nice stay in Hong Kong," he said. "We will be in touch." The fingertips tapped together. He turned and left, the door closing without noise behind him. They looked at each other. Charmaine said, "I feel a bit crook," and began to sway. Hurriedly, George stepped forward and held her arm. The skin on her elbow was warm. "I think I'd better lie down for a bit," she went on. "Must have been the drink." She turned as if to make for the bedroom, remembered what was in there, and veered abruptly towards the couch. Solicitously, he guided her to a seat. She put her legs up, a fine fawn knee and straight shin breaking through the aperture of the dressing gown. "Sit down," she invited, patting the cushion at her feet. "Please." He saw to his concern that there were large tears in her eyes. "I was engaged to a lifeguard," she sniffed. "He was a beaut swimmer." The tears overbalanced and dropped globularly down her cheeks. Her bosom heaved sorrowfully. Tentatively, he held her hand. "They often are," he said inadequately. "Eugene," she wept. "Bloody big bloke he was, muscles, and now look where I am." She swept her hand about the room, taking in the whole of Hong Kong with a gesture. "In the middle of 1,000,000 chinks with a dead bloody husband. Boo, boo!" Every undulation in her satin-clad body trembled with the sobs. "I'm here," George said without much assurance. "Yes, you," she sniffed. Sitting up on the couch, she operatically threw her arms wide and hugged him to her. Pleasure roared through his body. "You've been so bloody good, George." Her top half was held sobbing against him. Grief, he thought guiltily, had its better moments. "So bloody good." Her robe had dropped open. Beneath it she had on a brief pink slip, the upper lace cushioning the fine brown breasts. She caught him looking. "They're all I've got, really, George," she said. As she spoke, she eased down the top of the slip and let her splendid globes roll out. They trembled below his nose. "Touch them if you feel like it," she invited. "I don't mind you touching them." As if of its own motivation, his free hand went up. They descended again, both kneeling on the hotel room carpet. Putting his glass on the low table beside him, George shuffled round on his knees so that he and Charmaine were face to face. His other hand came up to the other breast, and he felt them with his palms. They were thus engrossed when, after a brief knock, the door was unlocked from the outside and opened. 4 Chinese came into the room bearing an oak casket. They took in the scene with no display of surprise. "Coffin for Mr. Mangles," said one man at the front. George was speechless. Clumsily, he attempted to shovel her bosom back into the top of her slip. By a swift, deep retraction of her diaphragm, she accomplished it herself. "Mr. Mangles is in there." She nodded sideways. The two stood up. Her neck and face were scarlet. George tried to pat her reassuringly, but she was rising to her feet and moving away from him. Following her to the bedroom door, George saw the men lift Ron Mangles in one practiced movement and slot him deftly into his box. They closed the lid with a bang and prepared to lift it to their shoulders. "Half a minute," George remonstrated despite his confused head. "How do we know this is all right and above board? Doesn't Mrs. Mangles get a receipt or something? You could be anybody." The Chinese regarded him with a narrow glint. "This paper," he said, holding out a slip he had been studying, "for Mrs. Mangles." "Thank you," sniffed Charmaine. She sat on the bed and morosely stroked the coffin. She accepted the chit. "We take Mr. Mangles," added the man. "Mr. Chen in touch with you tomorrow, okay?" The final word was addressed to his colleagues, who, at the signal, deftly lifted 3 corners of the coffin onto their shoulders. The leader inserted his shoulder under the vacant corner, and they set off adroitly navigating the doorway. George and then Charmaine followed them to the door of the suite and watched them march, casket aloft, down the long carpeted and deserted corridor. George turned towards Charmaine. Immediately she fell against him, pressing her bosom against his chest. His eyes swiveled up and down the passage. No one was there. He eased himself and her back into the room. She was still adhered tightly to him. "Please don't go," she whispered, beginning to cry voluptuously again. "I couldn't bear being alone." She rammed herself even closer. Their arms went round each other. "I'm just a poor lonely widow," she sobbed. The cemetery at Bollangonga, New South Wales, was not as George's vision of Australia had been. The bleak fingers of the great Port Kembla steelworks poked into the sky behind the graves. It was a stifling day, overcast, which the arrival of lukewarm rain did nothing to assuage. George stood with his Charmaine at the graveside. She cried some large, true tears below her big black hat. At the top end of the grave, into which the coffin had just been lowered, appeared 4 men in sombre suits with large hats held across their stomachs. "The police," Charmaine whispered. After the burial, the rain stopped and the graveyard began to steam horribly. One of the police, a short man in a black suit, trilby and proper tie, walked round the grave and stood ominously waiting at George's side. George grinned towards him and said, "What is this? Drug smuggling?" "Drug smuggling, right," repeated the officer. His eyes were on Charmaine's legs. "In the coffin?" suggested George. "In the coffin," confirmed the man. His eyes remained in the same direction. "You knew?" "I guessed," corrected George. "I've seen it in the films. Not very original, I must say." The policeman said nothing more, but did a tour round the grave, looking down throughout as if it were part of his duties to see that the job was properly done. George's unease was increasing. He helped Charmaine into a waiting car and followed her. The man boarded a car parked behind. They drove off. "I'm going," Charmaine whispered. "It's almost Christmas, you know." Both remarks took George by surprise. "Is it?" he said to the second. "I'd forgotten." "It's the 23rd of December," she said. She was holding his hand but looking straight ahead down the steaming road. "I'm going up to the Gold Coast to see my fiancé, Eugene, my ex-fiancé, that is." "To see if he'll have you back?" "Yes, that's it," she said stonily. "I'm very grateful to you for what you've done." She began to reach into her black handbag. "And now you're going to settle with me," he said sadly. "I said I would. I said I was hiring me." She looked straight at him. "That's it," she said. Her voice hardened. "Hiring you. Thanks very much." George felt hurt and deeply alone inside. She had taken an envelope from the handbag, and now she handed it to him. "That should settle it," she said. He took it. Then he leaned and kissed her on each cheek. She did not react. The car was slowing, and he realized they were at a railway station. "I'll get out here," she said. "All right," he said. She turned and left the car, closing the door behind her. She did not look back. While he was staring after her, watching her walk briskly towards the station entrance, the car door on the opposite side was opened. The plainclothes policeman stood there. "One door closes, another opens," he said. "Or closes," said George, regarding him with increasing suspicion. The officer was again watching Charmaine. One of the other policemen was now walking with her towards the station. She still looked straight ahead, as though he were not there. The policeman who had opened the car door now got in. The driver had remained stationary, looking to the front. George found himself moving over, and the newcomer sat down. Leaning forward, he tapped the glass partition. "The station, Bill," he said. "This is the station," pointed out George. "The police station," said the man. "My name's Bert Krausier. I'm a detective sergeant." "And I'm innocent," George informed him. "If you think I'm mixed up with that lot, Mangles and those Chinese, then you're wrong." He looked wildly out of the window. The nondescript streets of Bollangonga were going by. They stopped at a level crossing while a train went past. "Charmaine will tell you. She knows the truth." "She doesn't often tell it," sniffed Crozier. He leaned sideways confidingly. "Don't worry too much," he said with a certain sinisterness. "It may be all right." "Oh, good, I'm glad to hear it. Did you have any plans for Christmas?" Christmas! I'd forgotten all about it. Well, we've just fixed you up. Bolongonga Prison was an indifferent place to spend Christmas. George sat on his narrow bunk on Christmas Eve, staring up through the window's bars at a single, gloating star, his thoughts far from the fabled stable of Bethlehem. "I'll kill the bastards," he muttered. "I'll murder them." He hesitated, hope melting. Whoever they are. At Christmas dinner the next day, it was grandiosely announced that a Sydney radio station had, as a seasonal gesture, arranged for 25 prisoners to have free telephone calls to anywhere they chose. Everybody cheered, but then a disgruntled voice topped the others. Only 25? There were 150 prisoners in the room, and the realization of the odds hushed them. They were all to draw numbers from a hat, the lowest 25 to be the lucky ones. They circulated the hat while the men were eating their Christmas pudding. George drew number 17. "Hello, operator. This is the prison Bolongonga. Can I make a call out of Australia under the radio station scheme?" George was jammed in a small, aromatic cubicle. "Well, it doesn't say you can't," said a young man's voice. "I could ask the radio station, but if I were you, I'd just make it. I won't know. It's Christmas. I just dial it out. Right. Is it to the UK? Yes. Dial 0011 44 and the local code minus the first naught, then the number. Station XVY Sydney can afford a couple of dollars." George thanked him, thought carefully about it, and dialed the codes and then his own number. 10,000 miles away in his house at Chillington, in England, he heard the telephone begin to ring. It thrilled him in an odd way. He was conscious of his inward edginess. It sounded clearly. He could imagine it echoing round the rooms and furniture. It continued to echo. It was not picked up. He let it ring, a lump accumulating in his throat. There was nobody there to answer. Sadly, he put down the receiver. The phone rang immediately. It was the operator. "No luck?" "No reply." "There's been a lot like that. Funny how people clear off when somebody's in the nick. Do you want to try another number?" "Well, can I?" "Why not? It's not busy now. I'm just handling these special calls for station XVY. There's no special instructions. Try again."
This time he dialed the Birch's number. Again there was no reply. He stood staring at the receiver before slowly replacing it. It rang at once. "No luck again?" asked the operator. "No." "Want to try again somewhere else?" "Well, I don't have—" He had an idea. "You don't mind? They promised you a call and you haven't had one yet." "I suppose I couldn't try a number in France, could I?" He rang Lamar, but for the third time his call went unanswered. On impulse, and by now determined to talk to somebody, he rang Monsieur Benoit at home in Paris. "Benoit?" "Hello, it's George Goodnight. Happy Christmas. I'm in Australia." "Ah, monsieur, you are indeed adventuring." "Sort of. Please, how is Janine?" "Mademoiselle Joby died on the 3rd of the month." "Oh, God." "Yes, monsieur, it is sad that I must tell you." "Thank you. Well, that is all. I can't think of anything else to say." "I am sorry, Monsieur Goodnight." "So am I. Very sorry. She was wonderful." "There's one thing. You say you are in Australia." "Yes." "But that is extraordinary. Something came up as a result of her death. As a matter of fact, someone read the notice in the newspapers. It appears that we have solved the mystery. A little girl. We have not located her, but the man who took her was called Vaughan, Stuart Vaughan, a stamp dealer, as we have thought. And at that time he lived in Australia, in Sydney. He's not there now, I've checked. He was mixed up in some scandal and he vanished. But since you find yourself so fortunately on the spot, as they say, perhaps you might—" Yes, certainly. Goodbye, monsieur." "Goodbye, Monsieur Goodnight. I'm sorry it is such bad news." George replaced the phone. It rang and the operator asked if the line had been clear. He said it had been. "Right. Well, I hope everything turns out for you." "Thanks, and you." Somberly, he put the phone down.
The warder appeared at the door to take him back to his cell. Disconsolately, he sat on his bunk. He lay back and looked at the ceiling. La Manche. The gentle Janine standing at the window. All vanished now. If everything on his journeys had been merely one failure leading to the next, which it certainly seemed to have been, then he was glad of that one time and that one person. For that, and for her, it had been worth running away. He slept and woke and slept again through the long night, tormented by bitter dreams. The next morning he felt as lonely as he had ever felt in his life. So deep was he in his melancholy that the metallic sound of the door startled him. A square of face examined him through the grille. The door clattered open. It was a warder he had not seen before. "You've got a visitor." The warder studied a scrap of paper. "Goodnight, G. That's if you are Goodnight, G." "That's me," said George, sitting up. "A visitor? Somebody feels sorry for you," said the man with a shrug of his face. "They do at Christmas. Locked up?" They walked along the corridor to a long room with small sideways tables set along the wall. Each table was occupied by two people, a prisoner and a visitor, except the final one. Seated there was a fair-haired young man wearing a blue shirt. He did not look towards George, but sat with his hands together on the table before him. George glanced back to the warder and nodded his head questioningly in that direction. "That's him," said the warder undiplomatically. "Looks like he's blind." George studied the stranger at a distance and then began to walk towards him. The head was held in one position, not quite upright, the ear slightly angled to catch a sound. George emphasized his footsteps as he approached the table. "Ah, George," said the visitor. He stood up and held out a stiff hand. A white stick, which had been lodged against the table, fell noisily. Yes," said George. He retrieved the stick and shook the hand. "Pleased to meet you. But sit down. It was nice of you to come." "But who the hell am I?" laughed the young man. "I mean, you're not likely to have forgotten meeting me, are you?" "Well, I suppose not. We have met, but not face to face." The voice was strong and confident. "In fact, it was only yesterday." George was astonished. Then he realized, yes, I recognize the voice now. I'm the telephone operator. I'm Ollie Smith. I thought I'd just come and cheer you up if I could. I keep away from the crowds at holidays, on the beaches and everywhere. This must be one of the quietest places." George felt overcome. "Well, thanks for coming," he said uncertainly. "I didn't expect any visitors. I don't know anybody." "Why did they stick you in here?" asked Ollie. "It's all a damn nightmare," sighed George. "I hope to God it will be all over tomorrow. It bloody well better be." As though he had known the youth for years, George described the events leading from the moment he walked down to the swimming pool of the Hong Kong hotel. Ollie kept whistling in short bursts through his teeth. He never interrupted with questions, but let the adventure run on. In the end, he enthused, "Shilling hell, what a yarn!" "It's not such fun when you're taking part." Ollie shook his head. "They must have put you inside to keep you safe over Christmas," he said decisively. "Protective custody. If it's a big drugs case, there's no knowing what could have happened to you." There was a pause. "When did you lose your sight?" said George. "How long have I been blind, you mean?" corrected Ollie. 5 years next April. Motorbike accident. It hit me. I was just walking down the street." "That's terrible." "Wasn't all that good. I was hoping to qualify as an accountant. I never intended to be a phone operator." "Compensation?" asked George. "I'm a lawyer, as it happens." "You're a lawyer?" grinned Ollie. I am. What happened about it?" "Almost settled," said Ollie. "It's taking long enough, but it's nearly done now. I'll be rich soon. Well, quite rich." The warder approached, tiptoeing, apparently anxious not to disturb any of the line of successive conversations. "Half hour is up," he whispered. George rose from his chair. He held out his hand, realized that Ollie could not see it, and moved it towards the youth's hand. Smiling, Ollie rose, and they shook hands firmly. "How old are you?" asked George. 20, replied the visitor. "How old are you?" The blunt return surprised George. He had to think. "I'm 43, he said. "God, I'd almost forgotten." "When you get out, what will you do?" asked the young man. Again, the question took George by surprise. "I don't know," he said. "Various things. One thing is to try and trace someone. It's a girl who went missing a long time ago. I promised her mother. I'll tell you about it sometime." Ollie said astutely, "If it's a name you want to trace, I can probably help. We've got millions of names." "There's a man called Stuart Vaughan," said George. "He was a stamp dealer." It was the next day that a plainclothes policeman came to tell him he was free. "I'm Commander Doby," he announced. "Francis." He was thin and tall, but even so his suit was too tight. The cuffs had climbed up his forearms as if he had belatedly grown. "Thanks for all your help." "For what?" demanded George. "For going in the nick over Christmas." "That's part of it." Doby nodded amiably. "It was one of the biggest catches we've ever hauled," he breathed. "Bags of it, cocaine and heroin, all in the coffin with poor Ronnie Mangles." He paused. "We, the police that is, would be grateful if you would now forget the whole business. You won't be required as a witness. We've got the Chinese blokes all nicely tied up. They'll be coming up for trial in a couple of months." "What about Charmaine?" asked George. "Ah, the widow Mangles," mused Doby. "Well, she knew what was going on. She knew it wasn't just a honeymoon. Charmaine is a tough lady, believe me. She's testifying, so we won't charge her." "I hope she marries someone less complicated next time," answered George. He looked up. "Your people took my passport, by the way." Doby took out an envelope. "It's in there," he said. "There's also a modest cheque. It's to cover your expenses." "I haven't had any. I've been in prison. And inconveniences. It's a gratuity from our special source." He laughed shortly. "It's officially our informant's deposit. We call it the Narcs Fund." "Thanks," said George. "I'll still accept it." He took the envelope and stood up. Then he was taken to the prison gate and released. Ollie was sitting on a bench across the road in his upright position, his hands on his white stick. George grinned and stepped towards him. "Hello, Ollie," he said. "They've let me out." "I knew," nodded Ollie. "We telephone people know everything. That's why I came up. I found out something about Vaughan, the man you wanted to find, the stamp bloke." "You have? Good God, how did you manage that?" "I told you telephone people know everything. Wasn't all that hard. We keep records of bad debts going back years. I got somebody to check, and he turned up right away. Left without paying his bill." "You found his address? 84 Chiswick Way, Paddington." "Marvellous, Ollie. The trail's years old. That was in 1973. "It's a start. Thanks very much. What are you going to do now? Right now, I mean. You've got to have somewhere to go from here." "Yes, I suppose I have. My old woman, my mother says you can come and live with us if you like. Just somewhere until you decide what you're doing next." George found himself swallowing hard. "She did? You sure?" "I heard her." "Sorry, I'm a bit overwhelmed, that's all. She doesn't know me. I mean, I might get drunk and wet the bed." "I warned her you might. She didn't seem bothered." "And you've got room?" "Enough. You can have the old man's room. He's gone walkabout." "Well, thank you," said George. "What can I say?" "Don't say anything. Let's go." "It should never have happened to someone like him," said Ollie's mother. George was drying the dishes while she washed. "He's a decent kid. Even now you can see he's not bitter. I'm the one who's bitter." "At least I thought he would get a decent bit of compensation," she continued. "But as time's gone on, even that seems to have gone all wrong. It shrank and shrank. They're now trying to shift some of the blame onto Ollie, would you believe, saying he walked into the road and the bikie was distracted." "Have you got any of the case papers?" asked George. "Perhaps I could run my eye over them, if you like, that is." "I've got them," she said, rising from her low chair. Despite the warmth, she was wearing woolly slippers. "You're a lawyer, I'd forgotten." "It hasn't done me a lot of good," George reminded her. "I've just been in prison." George took them and read them through with care. "It's one of those cases where you might consider scrapping everything. Go right back to the beginning," he told her. "At the end, you might come out with substantial damages. After all, a young man has lost his sight. On the other hand, there would be another lot of waiting, months at least, a lot of aggravation, not to mention the expense, and there's no guarantee that you'd end up winning. Ollie's solicitors have gone about matters in a straightforward way, but it's not very imaginative." She shook her head. "I never thought they were any good," she said. "Too soft by half. But I can't see Ollie wanting to go back to the beginning. It's been too long. I certainly wouldn't want to go through that lot again." "It won't buy him new eyes," she sighed, "no matter how much it is." "It should be enough to make life a little more comfortable for you both," George pointed out. "I should hope so, anyway." "I'd like to go home," she said firmly. "To England." "How does Ollie feel about that?" he asked. Bleakly, she looked across at him. "He wants to buy a motorbike," she said. "But why not?" protested Ollie. It was odd to see him exasperated. His eyelids fluttered and his arms revolved like paddles. "Why not, for Christ's sake? I don't have to drive it. I can get on the back and somebody else can drive. You can." George looked at him unbelieving. "Me? You want me to drive it?" He looked towards the young man's mother. She shrugged helplessly. "Ollie," said George reasonably, "the logic doesn't fit. You can't buy a motorbike just so that I can drive you around Sydney. I'm not sure how long I'm likely to be here, and I haven't been on a bike for—" "Not Sydney," said Ollie quietly. They could see he had made up his mind. "Not just Sydney. Australia." "Australia!" George shouted the solitary word. "You can't be serious." The blind youth leaned forward, his face radiant in the park sunshine. "Listen, I've always wanted to see Australia. I've never been outside this state, hardly outside Sydney. I can't see it now, but if we go together, you can see it for me. You can describe it for me. Tell me about it. Once I get the money, I'll quit my job. We buy the bike, and away we go." George looked across at the boy's mother. Her eyes were wet. "How far is it to Alice Springs?" he asked. The next day, wearing a new fawn lightweight suit and pale shoes, George went to Paddington, where Stuart Vaughan had lived. The house in the leafy suburb was now occupied by a New Zealander and his family. He had never heard the name Vaughan mentioned, but he gave George the address of the house-letting agents. As he left, George saw a lopsided swing in the overgrown garden at the side. The uprights were rusty, and the seat hung by one forlorn chain. "My children are too old for swinging," said the New Zealander with a sort of apology. George said, "It looks as if it's been here for a long time. It was here when we arrived. It looked like that even then." The letting agent's office was in a street leading down to the waterfront of the Circular Quay. "We've only been handling that property about 5 years," said the woman who came in answer to the receptionist's call. She went to the rear of the office and returned with a folder. "There's no mention of the name Vaughan in our records." "Thanks anyway," said George. "Perhaps you could tell me where I can find the oldest established stamp dealers in Sydney." "Well, I can tell you the closest one," she said. "It's just round the corner." John Upney and Sons, philatelic dealers, had no display window, just a small showcase by the door. It contained a good selection of Australia State stamps from the 1930s, commemoratives from the visit of the Duke and Duchess of York, the future King and Queen. He pushed on the door. Inside was an office with an ugly desk and display cases around the walls. An elderly man sat at the desk bending close to a catalogue, as if he were not sure it was true. He appeared unwilling to acknowledge George's entry until he had completed what he was doing. Eventually, he looked up, a thin, grained face with raisin eyes peering above the rounds of his glasses. George said, "I'm trying to trace someone in the Sydney stamp business, or who was some years ago, and I wondered if someone here might know of him." "I've been here longer than anybody," boasted the old man briskly. "Who was it you was trying to find?" "A man called Stuart Vaughan." "Wilf Vaughan," said Mr. Upney at once. "Called himself Wilf. It was probably Wilf Stuart Vaughan, or Stuart Wilf Vaughan." He pulled a second chair towards his own, and, as if George had not noticed, nodded at it. George sat down. "It wasn't really him I was after," he said. "He had a daughter." "That's right," said Mr. Upney once. "She looked a bit like a dark mouse, dark under the eyes and skinny, not healthy looking." He blinked at George's expression. George leaned towards him. "Do you know what happened to her?" "Let me think. He had some trouble, Wilf, I remember that. Went off to America or somewhere. His wife now, she'd have taken the girl. They split up, you know. Yes, Darwin. Went somewhere up near Darwin, as far as I recall. The two of them." He looked at George. "Any use to you?" "It's something," said George. "She's at Darwin. If she's still there, that is." He stood up and held out his hand. "Near Darwin," corrected Mr. Upney, as he stood up to shake hands. "Could be anywhere in 500 miles. Was that girl his, Wills? She didn't look it." "No," said George. "He got her for a packet of stamps." In the courtroom, Ollie sat between his mother and George. The ponderous routine of the case made Ollie's mother twitch with impatience and nervousness. Ollie kept his head almost unmoving, suspended, his face listening to the voices. Only once did the judge return the young man's attention at the moment when he announced the award. He judged that there had been a proportion of blame attached to the victim because he stepped off the curb and had distracted the motorcyclist by waving to him. Damages were therefore on a lower scale than might have been. Oliver Smith would receive $50,000. "For a lifetime's blindness," said the young man's mother bitterly as they walked down the steps of the court. "And just because you waved." "You could appeal," said George, when they were on the bus going home. "I think properly handled, you could improve on the amount of damages considerably, but that would take a good length of time, another year perhaps, and it might not be successful." "We'll take the money and run," said Ollie decisively. On the bus, he appeared to be looking out of the window. "It's disgraceful," sniffed his mother. "It's my blindness," he answered, with the first sharpness that George had ever heard in his voice. A wretched look wrinkled his mother's face. George shook his head, a brief warning towards her, and she said nothing more until they were in the small house and she was pouring tea. "When are you going to get this motorbike, then?" she asked quietly. "As soon as possible," Ollie told her. "As soon as my money comes." "Ollie," said George cautiously, "there are a few things you ought to think about." "I want to go on this trip," said Ollie determinedly. "I always wanted to see Australia. This isn't Australia right here. Not this street, not Sydney. There's bloody miles of it. I can't see it now, but at least I'll be able to feel it, and you can tell me what it's like." Something oddly like a pout occupied his face. "It's not much to ask," he said. "Listen," said George, "I've got an idea. It depends on what you think of it." Both heads inclined to him hopefully. "For a start," he said, "I don't think $50,000 is an adequate award for a lifetime's blindness. Acknowledging the fact that I've not been familiar with the case all through, I have, however, read the documents pretty thoroughly, and I can't help thinking that it hasn't worked out as it should have done." "But an appeal might take ages," put in Ollie. "You said so yourself. We'll never get on that trip." "I've thought of that as well," answered George. "Say you did lodge an appeal, and I suggest change your legal representatives. We, that is, could still go on this exploration." The young man leaned closer, his eyelids flickering. "What on?" he said. George grinned. "A motorbike, if I could still ride one," he said. "I mean, what with?" corrected Ollie. "What do we use for money?" "Well, I can get hold of some money in a roundabout way from home," said George. "It involves selling postage stamps I own. In any event, I would not have let you finance the journey entirely. I would have paid my half. Now, all things being equal, I could put up the money for the trip. You won't be required, I shouldn't think, even by the solicitors, for consultations for 3 months. They won't have sorted through the last batch of papers by then. Solicitors are slow people. A preliminary meeting with you ought to be enough to keep them going for a while." Neither son nor mother said anything. The woman's head merely nodded. The youth's face was glowing. "So, what we do," said George, in the absence of any comment, "provided nobody in England has nicked my stamp collection, is to go on the trip with me putting up the money. Travelling around was, after all, my reason for coming here. One of the reasons, anyway. Then, as and when you get your damages, you can pay me back for your half." George felt the youth's hand curl round the back of his neck. Ollie pulled their heads together. "Jesus, George," he said, "you're better than a father." "A bloody sight better than your father," said his mother. The last picnic table before the great central Australian desert was among a clutch of eucalyptus trees on a brown domed hill. They drank a can of beer each, facing out into the vast emptiness of the interior, the motorcycle silent and ready beside them. Both Ollie and George were thoughtful and disinclined to speak. "We'd better go then," said George finally. They donned their helmets. George prepared to start the bike, but Ollie checked him. "I want to change my name," he said bluntly. "Ollie Smith sounds wrong. It's puny. It's a little kid's name. I think I'll call myself something else, George."
"Try Oliver Smith," suggested George.
His foot was on the starter. He was about to kick it when it came to him. "Or Oliver Loving," he said over his shoulder. This time his foot came down and the machine broke into coughing life. Smoke and noise enveloped them. Dust flew up as they jolted forward. "What?" bawled Ollie. "What was it?" "Oliver Loving," bellowed George over his shoulder. He manoeuvred the machine onto the dusty road. He accelerated, heading west. Storms of red dust flew around. "Loving!" shouted Ollie, clinging on. "That's it. Do you like it?" George had put his scarf around his mouth. "I'll say I do. Loving. Oliver Loving. I'm Oliver Loving." As they drove on day after day, the land became ever more vacant. Even the bristly outcrops of scarred trees that had previously occurred did not grow. The sun was livid, toasting the desert, singeing the small areas of their faces that were exposed outside the goggles, the helmets and the bandit scarves about their mouths. Dust rose from the road like gunfire. Names on the map went by without any visible corresponding mark upon the scene. Everywhere looked the same, burned and empty. Weowonga did materialize. 2 shacks with a weekly water tower, a pair of distraught trees, and a fly-infested Aboriginal family who hunched in a shelter fashioned from beer crates. They regarded the arrivals with pebbled eyes, their faces unchanging and their lips unmoving. Eventually, an old man with a grey beard like a garment rose from his squat and, when they had halted and dismounted, served them a beer, saying not a word, merely giving the cans to them and holding out his hand for the money. The Aboriginal family then observed them go, and as though on a single swivel, revolved to see them swerve from the road after less than 100 metres and fall into a red ravine. The motorcycle bucked fiercely, slewed and slithered. Its passengers shouted through their scarves as it took off like an inelegant flying machine and dived suicidally into the desert cleft. Its 2 wheels landed with fortuitous accord on the dropping slope, and it bumped down the red incline, lumps of desert flying, engulfed by its own choking dust. At the bottom, it shuddered to a standstill amid the spread-eagle wreckage of several other vehicles. Both passengers remained stunned and rigid on their seats. After the final collision, they hung on, George to the bike, Ollie to George. Ochre clouds billowed around them. As they subsided, they remained fixed as 2 clay figures. Coughing out small, rusty explosions as he did so, George lifted his helmet and called over his shoulder, "Are you all right?" "I'm okay," gasped Ollie. "Where are we, George?" "In the shit," replied George. The hulks of the other vehicles surrounded them. A lizard slid slyly from a shattered car window. Ollie began to laugh. George coughed, his laugh trapped inside by layers of dust. Eventually, amid the convulsions, it escaped, and they sat on the broken motorcycle deep in the ravine, both guffawing. Eventually, they stopped and clambered with some difficulty out of the ravine to the side of the highway. There they sat with their personal packs and waited. There seemed nothing else they could do. After about an hour, a fist of dust appeared in the east and slowly grew larger. Close to, it revealed itself as a truck. The lean, blue-eyed face that looked from the window broke into a toothless smile. "Good day," he greeted them. "Good day," responded George and Ollie together. "Nice day," added George. "Christ, a pom," said the newcomer. "I'm afraid so," admitted George. "Gone down the hole?" said the driver. He climbed from the truck and examined the ravine. "Which one is yours?" he asked. "Oh, the bike. I can see now. You'll be wanting a lift, I suppose." "It's either that or the flying doctor," said George. They got into the front of the truck and started on the road again. "I'm going to Utanwara," he said. "It's about 60 k's. Ah, but there's nothing there. There isn't even a way out. I look after the telegraph lines in this area, and that's where the bastards put me. I could drop you in Moronga. There's a rail stop there." He looked at his watch. "There's a train Thursday," he added, "or Wednesday, if you want to go back to Sydney." "We want to go on," George told him. Ollie nodded. "Then it'll be Thursday. She goes to the Alice. There's a shack of sorts at Moronga and some emergency tucker. It's not much of a place, but you'll have to sit and wait there a couple of days." In the glaring afternoon of Thursday, the westbound express appeared on the horizon, shimmering like a veiled dancer. They stood by the track and waved their shirts as the engine took shape. It wheezed and shrieked to a halt, apparently astonished that the pair should be waiting at the line side. Heads emerged from windows. The driver hung from the front of the train, which had overshot, and stared back at them. Eventually, the face of a guard was thrust out above them and regarded them with deep distrust. "What do you want?" he inquired brusquely. George looked at Ollie, who fluttered his eyelids. "We'd like to get on the train," George called up, "if it's all the same to you." The man looked flustered. "Get on? Well, yes, if that's what you want. You're going to the Alice, I take it, all the way?" "All the way," George assured him. "How long does it take?" "We'll be there tonight," said the guard. He led them along the corridor. "You got anywhere to lodge at the Alice?" Ollie shook his head, and George also. "It shouldn't be too difficult, should it?" George said. "Sometimes," said the guard. "The Alice is a great place for passing through, people coming and going." He produced a card from his pocket. "Todd Villa," he said. "My daughter's place. Very clean and all right it is too. She'll have rooms. She'll be at the station anyway. She always comes down to see me. They put some traffic lights in the Alice, and her husband got himself knocked down and killed last June, so she's trying to make a living. You'll like it there." Her name was Clementine. There was a statue of a camel at the station at Alice Springs, commemorating the dauntless animals and their Afghan drivers who opened the routes through the dead deserts of Australia, and Clementine was half hiding behind it. Her father came from the train, and they embraced. "I brought you a couple of lodgers," said the guard. "This is them. I don't know what their names would be." "I'm George Goodnight," said George. He realised Ollie was trying to contact him with his stick, so he shuffled nearer. "And this is Oliver Loving," he said. A grateful tap came from the youth. "Oliver Loving," Ollie confirmed, saying his new name to a stranger for the first time. He smiled, and his lids blinked. He thrust his hand out into the void before him, and gently Clementine took it. "My friend is a Pom," said Ollie, nodding to the position which George had just vacated. "So I hear," laughed Clementine. "If you really need some accommodation, I have room. My car's outside." Her father had duties with the train and left them. "That's all I see of him," said Clementine with a shrug. "Once every couple of weeks." She looked around. "Have you got much baggage?" she asked. Ollie's rucksack and George's modest suitcase were on the floor. "We travel light," said George, picking up his bag. Ollie found his pack unerringly. She watched him pick it up. "The car's parked," she said. "I'll have to get it." She walked away. "What's she like?" asked Ollie eagerly. "Too old for you," George told him firmly. "About 30 or so. Very nice. She's about 5'3", neat, brown hair, and kind eyes." Within a month, George was unofficially employed by Sack and Sack, lawyers in Erskine Street, Alice Springs, doing research with land and property matters, while Ollie was working at the Todd River Camel Farm. Ollie usually finished about 7 after the last of the day's tourists had gone, and was driven home by a young girl with a station wagon. The same girl, slight and brown, her fair hair pulled back into an uncompromising pigtail, was standing in the yard of the farm when George drove in. He had heard Ollie refer to her as Linda. She waved as he got from the car. "You come to pick him up?" she said. "I was late at the office, so I thought I might as well," said George. "That's if it's all right. "It's all right," she said. She was watching for something in the evening distance. "You're George, I know. He's told me about you." "And you're Linda," said George. He looked in the same direction. "He's really taken to the camels." "They've taken to him," she replied. "You can't fool a camel, you know. You can't bully them either. We had a man here who thought he could. He struck a match on the camel's arse. The camel kicked him and then sat on him." She nodded towards the horizon. A small dust smudge, like a bush, had appeared. "Here they come now." She paused. "How long do you reckon on staying at the Alice?" For some reason, the question surprised him. "I don't really know," he admitted. "We've not talked about it." She appeared relieved. "You seem to have sort of settled in. Look at you, you've got a job and everything, and Clementine makes you comfortable." "We seem to have settled in, as you say," George agreed. "The job is strictly unofficial. I don't even have a work permit, but nobody seems to mind out here, and I thought I might as well be occupied. It's only temporary." "You like it, though?" "Oh, yes. There's nothing like negotiating land rights in the never-never." "Clementine told me what you were doing, travelling around. I think you've been great for Ollie." The camels were clear now, trudging along the dry riverbed, strung out in their own skirt of dusts. George finished his beer. "He's been very good for me," he told her. "He's been a companion, more like a son." "He's a beaut," she said simply. The short caravan turned slowly into the yard. The tourists, two middle-aged couples, were voluble. Linda went forward and helped them down as the beasts folded their legs. "George is here," she called to Ollie. Ollie shouted to George and then slid down over the leading camel's neck as it knelt. It turned its great soft and sleepy head and made to nuzzle him. He patted its flank, and it obediently and ungracefully rose and strutted away towards the compound. "I've got some more to do," he said. "They've got to be fed and groomed, so I'll be some time." Linda began to smile. "I'll give him a lift," she said. "It's on my way." "Yeah," said Ollie. "It's on her way. In fact—" "Yes?" "Some of Linda's friends are having a barbecue. Is it all right if I go?" Yes, of course. Thanks, George. See you later." Back at what had become home, Clementine was sitting watching television. They had spent only a little time together in the weeks he had been in Alice Springs. Ollie was usually there in the evenings, listening to music through earphones. George would read the newspaper or watch television. Occasionally, he and Ollie had gone as guests to the ex-servicemen's club. Clemmy often went out to see friends or brought them to the house. Tonight, they were in together. George was suddenly aware of the odd domesticity of the situation when they sat down to dinner at the kitchen table. "Quite like old times," he joked awkwardly. "For me too," she said. They managed to converse through the meal. He helped her to wash up, and they returned to the sitting room together. She went to the piano and opened the keyboard lid. For 20 minutes she played while he sat in the easy chair. He had never seen a picture of her husband in the house, which he thought was strange. Now, leaning over to the bookshelf, he took out a photograph album, and he saw at once that it was full of them. He had been a lean man and careless-looking. His shirt was torn in the first picture, and he had failed to shave in several others. He had an Australian nose, sharp and thin, and strong eyes, which may have been laughing and may have not. "That's Frank," she said, as she half-turned. "Yes, I can see. Do you mind?" "Not at all." She left the stool, walked over to him, and sat on the arm of the chair. "I take it out and go through it myself sometimes. It gives me the excuse for a bit of a cry. But I don't have Frank's picture around the house. I find that too painful." "Was he from Alice Springs?" "No, South Australia, near Port Augusta. He always said he was just passing through, you know. Most people are doing that. He tried most things, prospecting and that sort of occupation, and he had to go at various business schemes, but nothing much worked. When I first met him, just after I came here from Melbourne, he was cleaned out, didn't have a cent." She stood up, firmly, went to the window, and stared out into the warm darkness. From there, only a few lights of the town were visible. "It's a real breaker of dreams, this place is, you know," she said. "The Alice is famous for it. You should go to the museum and see the aeroplanes that have crashed in the outback, and they haven't been found for years.
One pilot wrote his will on the side of the plane, and there's cars they've found way out beyond civilization and no sign of the people. It's a hell of a big country for getting lost." She turned and walked back into the room. "Do you want to see the news?" she asked. "It's 10. George turned on the television. She said she was going to wash her hair before going to bed. George remained watching the news and the sports programme which followed. The telephone rang. It was Ollie to say he was spending the night at the house of Linda's friends. A feeling of solitude came over George, a melancholy, a mild sensation of wanting to be part of something again. He went to his room and put on his pyjamas. He had brought a book up from the sitting room and he put it beside the bed. He went onto the landing intending to go to the bathroom. Clemmy had left her room at the same moment, in a dressing gown and slippers, her hair in a towel. They turned a corner of the landing, at right angles, all but colliding, and both letting out exclamations. Then they both laughed, before stopping at the same instant and looking at each other. Suddenly, her face fell against his chest. "I won't keep you," she whispered, as if that aspect had been on her mind for some time. "I won't stop you going." She pulled the towel away, and her damp hair fell down at the front and the back. George laid his cheek against it. He could hear one of their hearts thudding against her breasts. "We'll be company for each other," she whispered. "She's a good lady, that Clemmy," said the driver of the road train. The casual compliment came after almost 100 unerring miles. Straight and empty before them, the road pointed. Alice Springs to Darwin, 1,300 kilometres. The great truck tugged 3 heavy trailers. "She's very nice," agreed George. "She seemed upset to see you go," continued the man. He had a surface hair, dyed blonde above his brown face. "And the blind kid. I didn't know blind people could cry." "They can if they try," said George. "How long have you been at the Alice?" 4.5 months. Something on the direct but dusty road seemed to demand the attention of the driver, although George could see no hazards or change in the vacant landscape, for he fell silent. They stopped at Tennant's Creek, and George went to the cafeteria of the service area. As he sat there, he could not remember leaving anywhere with so much regret as he had left Alice Springs. But a time came to go from anywhere. He was tempted to telephone Clemmy, but after getting change at the counter, he put the coins away. He was glad for Ollie. The previous evening he had been walking along the bank of the dusty Todd River, as naturally as a man in England might have strolled beside a reflective stream, when he saw a camel coming from the opposite direction. Linda was on its back. "I thought you'd be out here," she called down. "It's the sort of place people come to do their thinking." She looked around at the dried mud banks. "You wanted to talk," he suggested, craning his neck to speak to her. "About Ollie?" "Yeah, he's just told me." "About leaving?" "No, I know that. He told me his name's not Oliver Loving, it's Ollie Smith." "Are you disappointed?" asked George. "About his name?" "My fault, I'm afraid." "Relieved," she corrected. "He's in a state now, you know. He wants to go with you, but he wants to stay as well." George looked across the arid watercourse. Evening was turning on its regular show of colours. "I think he's got to remain," he said quietly and regretfully. "I don't think he would ever be so happy as he is here." Her eyes became indistinct. "Thanks," she said, touching his arm. "You're a very good man." A small, brown, puckered smile came back. "Are your intentions honourable?" he grinned. "Very," she replied simply. "I think he's the most remarkable boy I've ever met." She paused, then said, "I've begun to love him very much, George. But there is a problem. I know he feels deeply for me too, but it's his blindness keeps getting between us. I want to marry him, but he won't ask me." "These days," said George, raising his eyebrows, "I didn't think ladies felt it necessary to be asked." She smiled. "Equality hasn't travelled this far yet. But it's not that. I would ask him. I think so much of him, I wouldn't back off doing that. But he's told me that he's likely to get a big financial settlement because of his accident. I don't want him to think I'm pushing him because of that." "Linda," said George flatly, "you ask him to marry you." He opted for a large lie. "His settlement is going to be minimal. I know because I've been getting the correspondence about it. I was the one who encouraged him to appeal against the 50,000 damages he was originally awarded. I'm afraid it's turned out to be rotten advice. The whole thing has backfired. The only reason I haven't told Ollie is that I keep hoping things back in Sydney will take a turn for the better. Unfortunately, they do not seem to be doing so. His lawyers are pessimistic. Very soon, I was going to have to own up to him." Her face livened with hope. She said, $50,000 is not very much these days, is it? And he has to think of his mother. Exactly. There are also substantial costs of the appeal. Frankly, if he gets out with half that amount, he's going to be lucky. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand like a child. "I'm so glad," she said. "I mean, that's peanuts, isn't it?" "It'll hardly pay for the honeymoon," smiled George. "And you don't mind?" she asked. "He's not mine," George told her. "I just borrowed him."
In the cafeteria, he began to think, as he often did when lonely and low, of Janine. From his pocket, he took a folded slip of paper with the name Mrs. Joan Vaughan, Old Pump, Cura, Northern Territories. He had found the address in the Darwin telephone directory. He had telephoned from Clementine's house, but the number had been discontinued. The relief driver came up to the table and sat down. He was an older man, a squat Italian, almost black with the sun. He wore shorts and a sweatshirt with the simple word Roma on it. "Do you know a place called Cura?" George asked him. "It's on this road." "Sure, Cura," answered the driver. "You know somebody?" George took out the slip of paper with Mrs. Vaughan's address. The Italian read it. "Waugan," he recited. "I tell you the place. I know Cura, the pump. She's still there." "How far from here?" "Oh, maybe 4.5 hours. You sleep, mate. I'll wake you." When he woke, the first inkling of dawn was on the edges of the earth. He felt wretched and aching. In the broad headlights of the great truck, the name sign Cura showed up against the early-hour dimness. "You want to stop?" asked the driver. "For a couple of minutes." "Sure." He began to brake. The long and ponderous trailers had to be slowed expertly, and it took time. They came to a final stop at the side of the road where a single one light peeped through the void. "Somebody home," commented the driver. "I wait." George jumped to the ground. It was a shabby place. The paint on the wooden door was flaking, and as he touched it, it came away in a great shard in his hand. The light that he had seen from the road came from a glistening oil lamp on the porch. There was a white plastic bell on the door, like a medal on a grimy old coat. Tentatively, he rang, and was astonished to hear suburban chimes sounding within. The door did not open, but a window did. A sash was pulled down with a crash that suggested some considerable force was needed to dislodge it. "Who's out there? What do you want?" Moving to one side, George saw the indistinct shape of a face behind the insect screen that covered the window. It was soon joined by a satellite face. "It's early hours," said the woman. "Yes, I'm sorry," said George. "I know it's inconvenient, but—" Then, inadequately, "I was just passing." "Well, keep passing," answered the man. "He's a pommy," said the woman sideways. "A pommy coming here." George took advantage of her interruption. "I'm going right away," he assured them swiftly. "But I'm looking for a Mrs. Joan Vaughan. She lived here." "She's gone," answered the man. "Where? Do you have any idea where she went?" "She's dead," said the man with finality and relish. "Dead? Oh, dear." "Years ago, 6 or 7, said the man. "And her daughter? She had a daughter." "Went to America," said the woman. "The girl. Don't know where." "Is that all?" asked the man. "We can't tell you any more." "No, well, thank you. I'm sorry to have bothered you. There's no one else in Darwin, perhaps, who—" They had gone. The window was pushed up with a thud that sent debris of wood, paint and dirt scattering down. "Thanks," muttered George as he turned and went back towards the truck. He was almost there when the door of the shack was opened, and he turned to see a ghost-white shape.
"Tom," shouted the man croakily, "try New York."
The door was slammed heavily. George climbed up into the cab.
"No good?"
said the Italian. "I've got to try New York," grunted George.
"Oh, we're not going that far,"
said the Italian, starting the big growling engine.
"You may not be," answered George, closing his eyes and lolling back in the copious seat, "but I am. It's more or less on my way home."
Once more he dozed, this time with no remembered dreams, and woke with the bumping change of direction as they turned into another staging area, the same as the others, with parked train trailers dwarfing a low-roof cafeteria. It was daylight. George got out and went towards the door marked Blokes. There was a double line of urinals in the centre of the room. As he stood at the grim trough, another man arrived and stood at the position opposite, so that they were facing each other, looking at each other over the curved top of the vitreous enamel. The newcomer was rough-faced and stocky, with a shag of unkempt grey hair chopped off at the neck and short on top, ravaged eyes, and a notable nose.
"Only place with decent china along the track," the man told George. "Tin of plastic everywhere else. This stuff came from Stoke, England, just after the war, just after they built the road. I heard you talking to Musso. You're English, so am I."
"How do you do?" said George. "My name's George Goodnight."
"Blanco Stern,"
said the stranger. Oddly, they shook hands across the top of the urinals.
"Are you travelling towards Darwin?" asked George.
He had finished and zipped and was now, out of politeness, waiting for the other man.
"I am,"
said Stern. He finished with what appeared to be a flourish and pulled up the fly of his creased white trousers.
"My ship's there. I'm a sea captain, between Darwin and the islands."
The South Daja Islands, Tanimbar, Selami, the Iwabs and Missoul lie between the equator and the northernmost capes of Australia. Darwin was far gone. The Gulf of Van Diemen and Melville Island had been navigated, and now they were sailing through the tail of the Indonesian archipelago, northwards into the Pacific.
"Know them like the back of this hand,"
mentioned Captain Stern, holding up his hand to show George. They were 3 days out, making a steady 6 knots.
"Do you have many storms?"
he inquired, as casually as he could.
"All the time,"
muttered Stern. The steersman nodded again, dolefully.
"Any time of the year. They hang around the islands. I think the buggers hide, lie in wait for us sometimes, and then whoosh, they're on us."
He patted the brass binnacle with belated affection.
"But the old outcast has come through every time so far."
"How," inquired George, "did she come to be called outcast?"
"An outcast of the islands," the captain said. "That's a full name, but the paint needs doing on the bow. Most of the words have fallen off somewhere."
He gave the Sarawak wheelsman a dig in his ample ribs and said,
"We're going to have a drink, Bertram. Don't hit anything."
It was clearly a familiar joke, but Bertram laughed anyway. Stern motioned George out of the wheelhouse and down the ladder to the deck. Islands lay low and green off the starboard bow.
"Watu Bella,"
said the captain. They went into his cabin, where Stern opened a mahogany drinks locker, and without asking George what he wanted, poured out 2 generous glasses of scotch. He nodded towards the chair, and George sat down.
"How long since you've been home?"
he asked, and then, as though to avoid confusion, added,
"In England?"
"A year now," said George.
"Oh, you'll be back in another,"
forecast Stern a little enviously.
"I've been out here so long it's too late for me now. If you don't go within a certain time, 10 years at the outside, home is just another foreign port."
They went back up and ate a curried lunch under a worn awning on the deck, sitting in 2 canvas chairs with a plastic table between them. The sea and the sky rolled by. Stern had produced a bottle of French white wine, and when they had finished that, they had another. It came, the captain told him, from Tahiti. "That's where Stevenson wanted to die, in Tahiti," Stern went on. "He sailed there, you know, with his whole family, wife, even his mother-in-law. He used to wander about Papeete in his pyjamas. But he was off the shipping lane, so instead he went to die in Samoa, which was on the England-Australia run, so he could get his money regularly and send his work to England." Stern went to lie down after lunch, and George went to sleep in the shade of his cabin. Late in the afternoon, it was Bertram who roused him. The man's big face was creased. "Captain Stern told me to tell you he's dying, sir," he announced. "You want to go and see him before he dies?" Hurriedly, George pulled on his trousers, getting the wrong leg in the wrong hole. He changed legs. Stern had been at his evening whisky early, he thought, knocking back a few more after their companionable lunch. But as he padded along the deck, he saw the natives of the deck crew grouped around the captain's door. "Excuse me, chaps," he said, going between them to get in. Stern was lying in his bunk, looking cornered. "Something's gone," said the captain. His expression was as if he hoped George might be able to repair him. "One of my pieces has fallen down inside me somewhere. It's happened before. They took me off in one of those helicopters once." A pale grin slid across. "There's not one flying about outside, is there?" "Afraid not," said George. He realized it was really happening, and a deep sadness moved into him because the man had been his friend for a short time. "Just lie back and take it easy," he advised inadequately. "We'll get to somewhere as quickly as we can." "Somewhere," smiled Stern again. "Always going somewhere, we are. Me and you too, if you're not careful. The world is full of Flying Dutchmen."
He sighed.
"Well, a burial at sea is always a novelty. Canvas coffin, last stitch through the nose, few words of prayer, committed to the deep. Over he goes, amen. Rum all round."
George regarded him defensively.
"You don't seem to be so bad to me," he pointed out. "You haven't stopped talking." "Always talked. Silent skippers are bad skippers. Mad skippers too. But I'm on my way. I know it too well."
The man's hand came from beneath the rough sheet, and hardly realizing he was doing it, George took it and held it in his. Stern's eyes had dropped, but he opened them and said,
"It's a pity we didn't meet earlier."
"Yes," said George sincerely, "it is."
"Thanks for your company, anyway, especially just now."
"Look," said George, leaning down, "we'll be in Seduna City in a few hours. You're in no hurry to go, are you?"
"Not me," answered Stern, "but whoever organizes these things is. I've wet myself."
He laughed, almost a cackle.
"The stern's sinking," he said.
George had never seen anyone die before, and he was surprised to realize how ordinary it was. It was like a door closing, the distance between one breath and the next. Stern died as soon as he had said his little last joke.
"The stern is sinking."
Because they had been talking that day under the awning and drinking the wine of Stevenson, George now, with a self-conscious mutter, recited, "Home is a sailor, home from the sea," half expecting Stern to look up and complete the epitaph. There were signs of slow activity ashore, and presently a small boat left the jetty and came white-nosed out towards the ship.
"The agent," muttered Bertram. "Mr. Mano."
Mano had half-Oriental, half-Oceanic features. He looked about him as soon as he reached the deck, as if seeking someone in charge.
"Mr. Goodnight, the passenger?"
Mano said.
"Yes." "Where's Captain Stern?"
He's dead. I thought you knew."
"Yes, I do, but where is he?"
The manner was impatient. The agent's face was aloof, as if he were busy that day, and a death was inconvenient. "He's in his cabin," said George, who decided he did not like Mano. At least, he was when I last saw him. "Do you want to see him?"
"I'd better."
He looked around as if hoping somebody else might go instead.
"I don't like dead people," he said.
"It's some of the live ones I don't care for," said George, moving towards the cabin. He opened the door softly. Mano followed and backed away a little as the Englishman took the sheet from his compatriot's moribund face. The smile, he was sorry to see, had frozen to a grimace. "That's him," said Mano curiously. "Yes, Captain Stern, dead. And you will be moving on. Where are you exactly heading?" They had stepped out onto the deck. The sun had cleared the hills and was rising like a balloon across the island. "I'm not exactly heading anywhere," George corrected. "I'm going in the general direction of New York." "Ah, yes, that is good." "But I want to be at Captain Stern's funeral." "Of course, so you will. Funerals do not take long here." George went to his cabin and gathered his few belongings. Mano was waiting on deck, walking a few yards each way with precise, impatient steps. He was already indicating the ladder. With difficulty, George climbed down. Mano followed him and sat down facing him in the small boat. The crewman started the engine, and they pulled away from the outcast. "Is it usual to just leave the ship like that, with a dead man aboard?" "Not unusual," Mano assured him. "Not in these parts." "I would have stayed," said George doggedly. He turned in the launch to look at the ship. A clear spiral of smoke was rising from amidships. "There's a fire," he said hoarsely. "It's burning." "So it is," said Mano. "The stove in the galley, you bet." But what about... We ought to go back." "This man," he said, indicating the man at the tiller, "won't go back, no way, not to a ship on fire. When we get ashore, we tell the fire brigade." He squinted towards the ship. George swiveled again. There was a deep glow on the deck, and the smoke had thickened. As they watched, there came a dulled explosion, and the glow widened like an opening flower, with a red cloud rising to join the rolling smoke. "Maybe they noticed it already," said Mano. He regarded George as if hoping for understanding. "It is a great funeral for a seaman," he said, patting him on the knee. "Lots of tribes send their chiefs out in burning boats. Better than the fishes eating you, or the worms." They had reached the harbour side. George looked seawards again. The old ship was burning fiercely now, a great welt of smoke above her. Sounds like grunts, as if she were complaining, came across the water. "Insured, I imagine," mentioned George. Sure, said Mano, his thick eyebrows rising slightly. "Ship and cargo," he sighed. "Not the captain. I feel a little bad, you know, bad about you, Senor Goodnight. How much money you got? How you going to get out of this place?" "By the bus, I suppose," shrugged George. "It's the only way, isn't it?" "Bus or car," said Mano. "And the road gets very bad for a car. The bus gets to Tenopulca about 12, 13 hours or so, all depending on the holes in the road. Lots of rain, lots of holes. But from Tenopulca you can fly to Manila, all the world." The agent went on. "I think that maybe we help you. We got you here, we get you out. George helped him. "Responsibility?" "Sure, out of here and on your way home." "Home," he repeated. "I mean, for God's sake, I think you entitled, if you think all about it. You a goddamn shipwreck mariner." He now looked towards George, his black eyes intense with sincerity. "We're gonna give you the bus fare." "Thanks," said George. "And from Tenopulca, the air ticket to Manila." "I see. You're not trying to get rid of me, are you?" he suggested. Mano appeared shocked. He stood ready to go. "Rid of you? You mean pushing you out of the Siduna City? No way. Where is there for you in Siduna City? You must not stay. You belong to the world." George took the rickety bus over the mountains to Tenopulca, then an equally rickety plane to Manila. There, with the air of a gambler reconciled to an endless losing streak, he laid out the last remnants of his money on a ticket to New York. Eastward, back towards home. Looking and feeling shabby, George entered the foyer of the Hilton Hotel, New York, under the disapproving and sceptical eyes of the doorkeeper. The Hilton Hotel, New York, which he had grandiloquently left in the Alice as his forwarding address, the signpost and personal memorandum of the direction he knew he had to go. At the reception desk, he produced his passport and asked for his mail. "Which room number, sir?" asked the clerk, doubtfully eyeing him. "I haven't checked in," said George evenly. "I intended to do so, but I changed my plans."
The man looked at him closely, shrugged, and turned to check a bank of pigeonholes behind the desk. With obvious surprise, he drew out a letter. "Mr. George Goodnight?" "Yes." The letter was from Ollie, written, he guessed, by Linda. There was also a cheque for 30,000 Australian dollars. "Dear George," said the letter, "Linda and I were married on October the 6th, and we are very happy. Clemmy sends her love. My settlement was $250,000, thanks to you. My mum cried so loud in court they had to throw her out. I enclosed a cheque for 25,000 for your professional advice and services. The solicitor said that this was right and fair, so don't argue. The other 5,000 is for my half of our trip and the motorbike." George found tears filling his eyes. There was a lot more of the letter, but he thought he would save it until he got to his room. He looked up at the clerk. "I think I'd like to check in now, if you please," he smiled. For a week he lay in the extravagant bed, his meals and drinks borne to him, the first snowflakes of the New York year rocking beautifully past his high window. He called Ollie in Alice Springs and spoke to Clemmy. Ollie was full of excitement. The camels were all fine, and he hoped Linda would not try riding them when she was expecting their baby. His mother had arrived in the Alice, but was now longing for her back street in Sydney, just as she had longed for a remote England from Australia. Homesickness was her vice. George thanked him for the cheque. "You saved my life," he said, and told him briefly why. "You saved mine, George," said Ollie seriously. "I owed you." After the first luxurious relaxation, he attempted, without much hope, to discover some trace of Stuart Vaughan, once of Sydney, Australia. He went to all the leading stamp dealers in New York and to meetings of 3 philatelic societies, at one of which he gave an impromptu talk on British possessions, but without arousing a single memory of Vaughan. He seemed to have vanished forever, and with him any clue to his acquired daughter. George did not even know Janine's daughter's name. She was no more than a shadow. Then, one day, an item on the final page of the New York Times caught his special notice. It was as brief as anything in the paper, a small, boxed advertisement which said, "Stamp auction. The second auction of the Joby stamp collection from France will be held on January the 15th at Carrington Rooms, 2393 3rd Avenue, New York. Jarrell Pike, Inc., Auctioneers, 1876 Lexington Avenue, New York." He immediately telephoned. "Oh, yes, sir," said the man. "The first part of the collection was sold in October. We got some record prices, I'm proud to say. Would you like me to mail you a catalogue?" George instructed him to send it by messenger, and it arrived within an hour. He sat in the Hilton bed and turned the pages slowly. Pictures from the past were there before his reflective eyes. There were some of the stamps he had so carefully and with such quiet enjoyment catalogued at the Villa Lamar so long before, when Janine was there and he was there with her. Page after page he turned. The Rose Victoria from the Gold Coast, the fine pair of British Columbia, the set of 4 Tasmania. His head dropped and he closed his eyes. That was the brief time when he had been happiest in his travels in his life. The following day he took a taxi to the Carrington Auction Rooms on 3rd Avenue. The stamp sale was in a tall, pale green and white room with oval windows. The chairs, lined facing the rostrum and on either side, were already mostly taken by people in heavy coats, bowing over catalogues, mumbling like monks. Bids were conducted almost in secret, it seemed, in a code of flicked eyebrows, crooked fingers, and imperceptible scowls. George could see little of the business from his place, although the prices were affording the auctioneer some satisfaction. It occurred to him that perhaps Monsieur Benoit might have sent a representative, or perhaps even made the journey himself. It was possible, now he considered it, that one of the Joby family might even be present. He began to look carefully about him. Then he saw her. She had just come into the room. A man made space for her, and she sat on the end of a row on the opposite wall. It was all apparent, the small profile, the profound face, the calm eyes, the slight frame. His breath caught. Janine Joby's lost daughter. Immediately George wanted to get up and go across the room to her. The auctioneer's incantation went on. $150, $170, $180, $200. George, tingling inside, could not take his eyes from her. She was wearing a dark blue coat. Around her head she had worn a silk scarf. But now she took this off and shook her hair. The same hair. Her deep eyes were in the direction of the auctioneer. Incapable of sitting immobile for a moment longer, George mumbled excuses to his neighbours and bowed low, made for the back of the room. This was not easily done without some disturbance because of his size, his inherent clumsiness, and the bulk of his overcoat. One of the people who had turned to look at him with curiosity was Janine's daughter. "Miss Joby?" he asked. "That's me," she replied. She regarded the crouching man with a little amusement. He recognized the look. "I am sorry about this," he said hoarsely, "but I need to speak to you urgently. I knew your mother." The young woman's face straightened. She left her chair, and George stood. He made way for the young woman, and they left the room together. In the corridor outside, George faced her. She examined him quizzically. "You knew my mother?" she said. "Very well," he said. There was a long seat in the corridor below her painting. "Let's sit down," he said. "Please, I recognized you the moment I looked at you. My name is George Goodnight." "How long ago?" she asked. Her voice was American. "When did you know her?" "Just before she died," he said. I was very close to her. I promised her I would try and find you." At once, tears came to her eyes. "She died," she said. "And she wanted to find me?" "Very much," he told her. "I went to the house at Paddington in Sydney where you lived with the Vaughans." Astonishment crossed her face. "I saw the swing you used to swing on," he smiled. "And I went to Curra, near Darwin, the wooden house, and I've asked after you in many places, and now here you are. I was so overcome when I saw you." "Can we walk outside?" she said. He understood. They went out of the building. There was a small park, little more than a garden, with a few skeletal New York trees, a frozen fountain, and a snowy bench. "She really, really wanted to find me?" she sighed. "She had no idea what had happened to you. I don't even know your name." "Christine," she said as they walked. "I still use the name Vaughan. It was only after my father, Stuart Vaughan, died that I came to find out that I was not his daughter. He would never have told me. Even then, and maybe this sounds crazy, but it's what happened. Even then, I was not over-anxious to find out about my past. Maybe I was afraid of it. I didn't want it intruding. I have a life of my own now. I'm just about to be married." "How did you come to be here today?" he asked. They stopped, and he spontaneously held out his hands to her. Hers came slowly forward and took them. "I knew my real name was Joby and that the family was French, but it's not an uncommon name in France. The man I thought of as my father, Stuart Vaughan, was always connected to the philately business. A friend who knew a man who knew Stuart Vaughan through the stamp business called me a few months ago and told me that a Joby collection of stamps was coming for auction in New York. That was the first part of the sale in October. I came, and I sat and listened, and I asked a few questions. But I didn't do anything. I guess I was still backing off, so I came today." George said, "I would have recognized you anyway." They walked a few more paces. "I think you must get in touch with the Joby lawyers. You come from quite a wealthy family, you know," he said. She smiled, Janine's quiet smile again. "Thank you, Mr. Goodnight," she said. "It was very good of you, very good. But I'm not after anything. As for me," he shrugged, "I'm just glad I found you." Air France Flight 070 from New York to Paris landed on time at Charles de Gaulle. The European mornings were growing a little lighter. Monsieur Benoit was waiting for George, and his car was outside the airport. "I cannot believe how you discovered her," said the lawyer, shaking his head as they drove along the autoroute to the city. "I looked up, and there she was," said George. after all your journey." He smiled at George. "You look well, monsieur. You have had a good time in the world." "In parts," said George. "It has been varied, to say the least. Now, I don't know how to stop it." The Frenchman nodded. "Ah, yes, I understand. It is like a runner. He must keep running." He moved his eyes sideways. "Are you prepared for another little assignment?" George was startled. "Now? I was on my way home." "But uncertain about arriving there," pointed out Monsieur Benoit. "Anxious." "Backing off," said George. He remembered Christine had said that. "I feel I won't know where to go, who to see, if anybody. I don't have many friends. I was too lazy. I can't just walk the streets." "Then what I am going to suggest will give you a pause, a little time to prepare yourself for your invasion of England," said the lawyer, smiling. "And I think it is of interest to you. It concerns the Joby stamps." "I see. You want me to sort out the rest of the collection?" "Exactly. Monsieur Julian can be of some help to you. How long the work would take, I cannot tell. Only you would calculate that." 2 months, 3 months, if I remember the state of things," said George doubtfully. "And remember, I only really have a good knowledge of British stamps, and I'm a bit out of date with those. Who organised the stamps for the New York sale?" "A Paris company," said Benoit, with a grimace. "But it was very expensive, and Monsieur Julian was not happy with the way they went around it." He paused, and then said, "How do you think?" "Where is Janine buried?" he asked. "Oh, she was cremated, the family wish. Her ashes were scattered to the wind at Lamar." George nodded sadly. He knew how hard it would be. It would mean going to the house again, where he and Janine had been together. He saw himself with her, eating, talking, walking by the sea. "Yes," he said slowly, "I would be pleased to do it." Above the January Channel stood the sturdy house, scudding clouds flinging brief shadows across it. George walked the hill and went into the courtyard. Everything was as it had been, except now it was winter, and she was not there. Twigs of wintry sun came through the windows as he stood sadly, remembering the patterns of a summer's day. Everywhere was clean and echoing. The room where they lived together, happy in each other's company, the bedroom where they had lain embracing through the nights. He stood at the door, looking in at the bed, his heart full, and walked in and touched the counterpane. On the dressing table was a single photograph, and he went to it. Even at a distance, it struck a memory. It was Janine and him standing by the Cherbourg quay, taken by Marie from the Hotel Bismarck. George picked it up, his throat full. She was smiling, the seashore wind disturbing her hair. They had been holding hands. Gently he kissed her. George knew that he would not be able to work there, not in that place of echoes. He went back to the hall, looked about him, and walked out. He strode purposefully over the courtyard, and with the wind behind him almost ran down the hill towards the roofs of the town. He had been staying at the Villa Bismarck, and now he returned there thoughtfully. Coming back, he told himself, as he lay on his bed in the same room as he had occupied before, had been a mistake. It saddened him beyond anything he had ever known. With Benoit's agreement over the telephone, the stamps were brought to the Villa Bismarck. The collation and cataloguing took almost 3 months, with George working at the parlour table 6 hours a day, and Monsieur Julian helping sporadically. When the task was finished, George told the old Frenchman that he was going home to England the next day. He had to face it sometime. He sailed on the noon ferry from Cherbourg to Plymouth. For some fancy, a little more procrastination had made him decide to retrace his early steps. There was no hurry. Nobody eagerly awaited him. At 8 that evening, the ferry docked at Plymouth, and he stepped ashore in England. The notion of returning by the same route, retracing his steps, appealed to him for reasons of romanticism, acclimatization, and indecision. If he had gone straight to Shillington, which he still imagined as home, his eventual but tentative objective, he would have undoubtedly been required to leave again after a fairly short interval. Where, then, would he go? The following day was Wednesday, a light spring morning, and he knew there would be a bus from Warminster to Summerborn Magna, taking people home from the market. He caught the London train and got out at Warminster station. The bus drew up in the market square. Summerborn Magna displayed above the cab, and he was among the first to board it. He sat at the back and listened to the talk of the village people who had never been to, perhaps never heard of, the Alice or Siduna City, and who did not care. Eventually, a ripe-faced woman with a woolen scarf gagging her ears turned abruptly, as if it were his turn. "You know that Molly, don't you?" she said, "at the Red Cow." Slowly George admitted he did. Several neighbouring women now revolved in their squeaky seats as much as their bodies, bulky coats, and shopping baskets would permit, and studied him. "Got married 2 weeks last Saturday," said the first woman. "Lance onions?" asked George. She confirmed as though she were disappointed that he guessed correctly. "And never before time either." "'Cepting his name's not Lance," put in another woman. "'Twas Cecil or something, wasn't it?" "From Somerset," said a third gossip, accusatively. George felt like a stranger in a strange land. His apprehension multiplied as they neared Summerborn Magna. It was late afternoon when he arrived. The inn door was locked. Familiarly, he went round the side through the garden gate. Molly's face was framed in the kitchen window where she was standing at the sink. She looked up from the soapsuds and saw him looking in at her. She screamed vividly and rushed back out of sight. "Molly, Molly," he called, moving to the kitchen door and calling at the crack. "It's all right. It's me." He heard the bolts on the door being manoeuvred. He thought to open it. But when he tried it, he realized it had been barred. A quarter of Molly's face appeared at the side window and stared at him in one-eyed horror. Then she vanished. He stood haplessly. He could hear her shouting within the walls. Sitting on the garden seat, he waited until the bolts were withdrawn again, and Bert stood there. "You come for your suit?" the innkeeper inquired. "Molly's just gone to get it from where it's hid." "Thank you," sniffed George, polite but offended. "Can't be helped," Bert told him with truthful sorrow. "Lance wouldn't like you here. Lance gets violent." "Still," said George. At that moment the aperture was widened and Molly stood behind her father, holding his original suit on a hanger. Even though she tried to conceal herself behind Bert, he was slight enough for George to see she was enormously pregnant. Her face was puffed, and her hair rankly dyed. "Here it is," she said nervously, handing the suit forward. "Thought you was never coming for it. I had to keep it hid." "Thank you," said George again politely. He took the suit. "Sorry to have troubled you. I was not worried about the suit. I came to see you." "Lance is upstairs asleep," she warned in a whisper. "Driving off tonight." "Wick?" he inquired. "Wick," she confirmed. "It's the furthest he ever goes north," put in Bert. They were patently anxious to shut the door. George sighed his disappointment and, thanking them again sadly, he turned away. Standing in the small village, holding a suitcase and a suit, he realized he was stranded and once more with nowhere to go. He looked up over the blossoming fruit trees in the tangled back garden. The roofs of the motorway service area were showing above the rim of the hill. With a shrug, he began to go that way. Ben was on the forecourt, still hobbling, walking back towards the pay kiosk. George called to him, and he looked up as if unable to remember. Then his face changed, and he limped forward brightly. "Oh, it's been months," he said, shaking George's eagerly offered hand. "Where you been? Not in Westbury all this time?" George laughed a trifle and said, "A bit further. Don't tell me somebody's run over your toes again." "Same thing," said Ben. 2 years ago now, near enough." He remembered that clearly. "Never get better now," he said. "The bones went wrong." George said he was sorry to hear it. "Can I stay?" he asked. "One night. I'll rent a car tomorrow and drive to London or wherever." "In the motel? Aye, there's plenty of room. Go ahead." George turned moodily and walked towards the motel, his fears confirmed, his heart heavy. There was nobody for him to know. He was scarcely remembered, and where he was remembered, he was no longer welcome. He stood in front of the telephone in the motel reception area, weighing coins in his hands. He should phone. Phone his wife. Phone Fred. Say, what? What could he say that they would want to hear? More important, what could they possibly say to him that would make any difference to anything? He was back and did not want to be back. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. He felt utterly paralyzed. He had no idea what to do. He sighed and put the coins back in his pocket, at least for the moment. He walked out again onto the service area forecourt, where he found Benny in concerned conversation with the driver of a truck and trailer. Wearing orange overalls, the driver sat on the step of his cab. Even sitting down, he was tall. His face was tall also, one of the longest George had ever seen, and featured a wild moustache. George wished them a pleasant evening, and Benny waylaid him. "This is Walter Fanshawe, Mr. Goodnight." "Walter's got a problem," said Benny. "He's carrying eels." For a moment, George thought this might be some parasitic illness like worms, and stared sympathetically at the tall, skinny man. But Benny patted the side of the vehicle and said, "Millions and millions of them, baby eels, elvers they call them. Walter takes them abroad." "All over," said Fanshawe, spreading his enormously long arms. "Moscow, Turkey, Romania, everywhere where they like eels. They put them in tanks and feeds them up until they're huge." His arms spread further, and then they eats them. This cargo's worth a fortune. "What's the problem?" asked George. "Hijacking?" Fanshawe emitted a little dry laugh, more like a cough, which mildly disturbed his overhung moustache. "His mate's not turned up," said Benny. "Have you got your passport with you?" "Me? Well, yes, but..." The familiar realization came quickly. "But I couldn't drive one of these. I need a license." Benny said impatiently, "You don't need to drive it. You just have to sit with him." "I fall asleep by myself," confessed Fanshawe. "I didn't used to, but I do now. I'm all right if there's somebody with me to talk to me." Slowly, George turned towards Benny. "It's easy," said Benny. "You reckoned you wanted to travel. Hanging around Westbury and Devizes isn't travelling, is it? Now's your chance. Sit and talk. That's all you've got to do. Tell him a few tales." George felt inside his jacket. His passport was there. "Where's the final destination?" The long man in the orange overalls looked at him hopefully. "Istanbul," he said.